I'll let this slide just this once. What is he even talking about? He seems so clueless. Maybe it's time to bring him back to reality. My name's Olivia, I'm 32 years old, and I've been married to my husband, Mason, for a year now. We met at a casual party a friend hosted. We hit it off, started dating like most couples, and eventually got married. We weren't getting any younger, after all. Mason isn't the most exciting guy, but he brings a sense of peace to my life. I thought we'd be together until we were old and gray. We both work, so money isn't a problem. When we got married, I didn't overthink it. I handle most of the housework since we're both busy with our jobs. Mason doesn't help much. He either lounges around or leaves early, spending little time at home. Still, I didn't see it as a burden. My parents lived the same way, so I assumed this was just how life as a wife would be. I work a 9-to-5 job and don't have many hobbies. Mason and I weren't big talkers from the start. We respected each other's space, and it never seemed like a problem. Life just went on. One night, Mason came home late. Probably out drinking with coworkers or friends, I didn't know. "You're home late," I said as I welcomed him. "Long night?" "There's dinner if you want, but I guess it's too late for you to eat." He didn't respond. He just turned away and walked into the living room, ignoring me completely. I sighed. Here we go again. Whenever Mason's in a bad mood, he shuts down. I assumed something at work or during his night out upset him. I knew better than to push him when he was like this. I shrugged it off and went to bed, thinking he'd be back to his usual self in the morning. It wasn't the first time, so I didn't dwell on it. The next morning, I was preparing breakfast when Mason walked into the kitchen. "Good morning," I said cheerfully. He gave me a glance, grabbed some milk from the fridge, and left without saying a word. That wasn't like him. He's usually not this cold. At first, I thought he just needed more time to shake off whatever had upset him. So, I didn't press him. I continued making our lunch boxes and carried on with my day. But things didn't go back to normal. Mason stayed distant that night, and the next day too. At this point, I was starting to get worried. I was genuinely worried. Days turned into weeks, and Mason still wouldn't talk to me. I tried messaging him on WhatsApp and even left him little notes, but he ignored them all. The only sign that he acknowledged anything was when he ate the meals I prepared. His lunchbox would always come back empty. I thought maybe slipping a note into his lunch bag might get a reaction. Surely, he'd respond if he found a kind message while eating the food I made with love. But even that didn't work. Mason stayed silent. Before I knew it, over a month had passed in this strange, suffocating silence. I felt helpless. I had tried everything, but nothing seemed to reach him. One evening, I decided to do something drastic. I didn't make dinner. Usually, I'd prepare a meal every night without fail, but this time, I wanted to see how Mason would react if it wasn't there. When Mason got home, I was pretending to watch TV in the living room. He walked in, looked at the empty table where dinner was always waiting, and then glanced at me. I held my breath, expecting him to say something, anything. But he didn't. Instead, he turned around, walked out of the living room, and slammed the front door shut behind him. I was stunned. Why was I being treated like this? What had I done to deserve this silence? I sat there on the couch, feeling completely lost. The next morning, Mason was already gone when I woke up. Curious, I went to the living room and saw a note on the table. My heart raced as I read the words, written in messy handwriting. "Stop skipping out on your wifely duties." Something inside me snapped. That was it. I'd had enough. Why did everything have to be about pleasing Mason? Was this what the rest of my life would look like? We were never an overly affectionate couple, but this treatment was unacceptable. Mason hadn't given me any reason for his behavior, and I had no way to even bring it up. The past month of silence had been unbearable. I grabbed a pen and wrote a response on his note. "I'm going back to my parents' house." Then I packed my things, left the house, and went to my parents. They were surprised to see me suddenly, but when I explained how Mason had ignored me for over a month without any explanation, they understood and welcomed me back warmly. It felt so good to be in a place where I could have a normal conversation again. For now, I was finally at peace. I decided to stay at my parents' house and see how Mason would react before figuring out my next steps. The day I left, I didn't hear a word from him. Knowing Mason, he probably thought I was just trying to prove a point and would eventually give in. Fine, I thought, let's see how long this game lasts. Days turned into weeks, and Mason still didn't reach out, not a call, not a message, nothing. He didn't even bother visiting my parents' house. Before I knew it, 6 months had passed, and Mason was barely even on my mind anymore. Then, one day, as I was leaving the house to go shopping, I saw him. Mason was standing there with an angry, defiant expression. I froze, shocked to see him after all this time. He just stared at me, saying nothing. Was he really still playing this silent game? It was almost laughable. But then he suddenly tried to walk straight into my parents' house without a word. "Whoa, hold on there," I said, blocking his way. Mason looked at me, his face twisted with anger and disbelief, but still silent. I warned him, "Don't just walk in, or I'll call the police." Finally, after more than 6 months, Mason spoke. A smug smile crept across his face as he said, "Look at you, acting all high and mighty just because you're at your parents' house. Since when do you get to talk to me like that?" I remembered Mason being a bit rough at times, but not like this. His tone was completely condescending. As I stood there, lost in thought, he suddenly erupted, "What the hell are you thinking? You've been gone for half a year, just lazing around here while I've been stuck by myself. Get a grip." He spread his arms out dramatically, as if to say, "I can't believe this." Then, in the same arrogant tone, he added, "Look, I'll give you a break this time, okay? Just come home. I'm willing to turn a blind eye to this." His words were so dismissive, so insulting. I couldn't stay calm anymore. "I think you're confused," I said firmly. "You and I are strangers now." Mason's face went blank for a moment, then turned bright red with rage. He started yelling again. "What the hell are you saying? Have you lost your mind? We're married, aren't we? Stop messing around." His outburst left me speechless for a moment, but he didn't stop. "I'm saying I'll forgive you this time," he yelled. "So stop fooling around and pack your bags." Hearing those words made my blood boil. He was acting like he was doing me a favor, like I'd done something wrong. The sheer arrogance of it made me angrier than I'd ever been. It was clear Mason had no idea what had really happened during the past 6 months, or how much I'd changed. I'd finally had enough. Mason was still yelling at me when I snapped. "I already got divorce papers from your mother, signed them, and filed them with the court. So we're not married anymore. Got it? We're strangers. Total strangers. Understand?" I emphasized the word strangers, and Mason's face went pale. He looked genuinely shocked. Here's what had happened. About a month after I moved back to my parents' house, Mason's mother, Helen, called me and asked to meet at a cafe nearby. We were never close, so this surprised me. After some polite small talk, she handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, tilting my head. "Open it, and even you'll understand," she replied coldly. I opened the envelope and pulled out a divorce petition. It was already signed and stamped by Mason. Confused, I looked at her. Helen's glare reminded me so much of Mason's, full of disdain. "So, is this Mason's doing? Did he say anything about this to you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Helen sighed dramatically and said, "Oh, he had plenty to say." "Would you like to hear it?" "Yes, please," I said with a polite smile. Helen then launched into a rant. According to her, Mason had been complaining about me for a while. He told her I was a lazy, useless wife who stopped doing housework after we got married. He claimed I quit my job, lazed around all day, and ran back to my parents' house whenever things didn't go my way, like a spoiled child. Helen's piercing gaze never left mine. It was obvious she believed every word of Mason's lies. When she finished, she asked with feigned innocence, "So, what are you going to do?" "Not that I want to meddle, but you're being pretty awful, you know." By the time I left that cafe, my decision was clear. I smiled at Helen and replied, if he wants a divorce, that's what he'll get. Helen glared at me one last time, threw some money on the table to cover her share, and walked out. I went straight home, signed the divorce papers, and submitted them to the court the very next day. As I finished explaining all of this, Mason's face turned even paler. It seemed he had no idea Helen had followed through on filing the papers. But honestly, I didn't care. I trusted Helen to pass along the signed papers, and Mason clearly had the same idea in mind, he just hadn't expected me to act so quickly. Suddenly, Mason blurted out in a panic, "No. You've got it all wrong. I only filled out those divorce papers to keep my mom off my back. I never intended to file them. They're invalid." He started rambling, making no sense. Then he said, "Besides, you'll be the one who suffers if we get divorced. Let's go to the court right now and have them withdrawn." His words were desperate, but I wasn't about to let him drag me back. I gave Mason a cold, hard stare. Then I tilted my head and asked, "Why would divorce be a problem for me?" Mason suddenly grinned, acting like he had the upper hand. "Think about your age. At your age, with a divorce on your record, no one will want you. That's why I'm saying I'll take you back. This is for your benefit. You should be happy." I couldn't help but roll my eyes at his arrogance. "Listen, Mason. Divorce doesn't just get erased. And for the record, I'm already married to someone else." Mason's jaw dropped. "What? Really? Do you want me to repeat myself?" "I'm married to someone else." Mason looked stunned for a moment, then started ranting. "That's a lie. You're just making that up to get rid of me. You think I'll fall for that?" Before I could respond, someone walked up behind me. It was Noah, my husband. He stepped out of my parents' house, looking confused. Mason froze, staring at the stranger in shock. Noah glanced at me and asked, "Is something wrong?" Feeling awkward, I smiled and introduced them. "Mason, this is my husband, Noah." Noah nodded at Mason, looking slightly skeptical. Mason took a step back, clearly overwhelmed. Noah was a former rugby player, and his strong, imposing presence made Mason visibly nervous. Mason quickly started making excuses. No, you've got it all wrong. My old boss told me to do this. He said to put you in your place, and I listened to him. But hey, he got dumped by his own wife and kids, so what does he know, right? I never wanted any of this." I stared at Mason, disgusted. His excuses were pathetic. Then Noah spoke up firmly. "I think it's time for you to leave. If you come near Olivia again, I'll call the police." With that, Noah stepped forward and ushered Mason out of the doorway. Mason, intimidated, stumbled away and left. For a while, Noah and I stayed cautious, worried Mason might hold a grudge. But as days turned into weeks, we never heard from him again. Curious, I later reached out to a mutual friend to ask about Mason. They filled me in. Apparently, Mason quit his job shortly after showing up at my parents' house. He had always supported his boss, who was known for harassing employees. When the company forced the boss to step down and transfer to a remote location, Mason was expected to follow. But out of pride, Mason quit instead. Now, he's jobless and struggling. His arrogance makes it hard for him to find work. He refuses interviews even when recruiters reach out. To make matters worse, his mother, Helen, disowned him after learning about his behavior. Our friend sighed, he spends his days drinking and blaming his old manager for everything. Honestly, if he keeps this up, he'll ruin his health before he finds another job. I doubt he'll find another spouse either. We both chuckled at Mason's downfall, then hung up. As for me, my life with Noah has been wonderful. Interestingly, Noah and I were co-workers, and he pursued me after hearing about my divorce. Though I was hesitant to date so soon, his kind and confident nature won me over. We married 6 months later. Noah later admitted that he had always had a crush on me and was heartbroken when I married Mason. I laughed and apologized for not noticing his feelings earlier. Now, Noah helps me around the house, something Mason never did. He always compliments my cooking with a warm smile, and these little things bring me so much joy. I never realized how numb I had become to Mason's indifference. With Noah, I'm living a happy, sparkling life. I'm certain we'll share this joy through our golden years.
Steve said confidently, "I built that house, so it belongs to me. Now you have to leave even though we're splitting up. I don't think you can manage on your part-time pay." Steve chuckled as he showed her the divorce papers. "My name's Katie. I'm 33 years old. Recently, I got a job working part-time at a nearby supermarket. I married Steve 3 years ago after we met at work and both quit at the same time. I wanted to keep working after we got married, but he wanted me to stay home. So I became a full-time housewife, even though I really miss working. But I kept feeling like I wanted to work outside the house more and more. After a lot of talking, I finally got a part-time job. We want kids, but we haven't been able to have any yet. I really wanted a cat as a pet, but Steve really doesn't like them, so I sadly had to give up on the idea. Steve used to want me to stay home all the time, but he got mad when I started working part-time and started complaining about everything I did. You went to work again today, huh? Lately, it seems like the house is getting messier. Are the clothes all wrinkled in the laundry? You're not keeping up with the housework," Steve criticized. That wasn't true. I had finished cleaning before going to work, and the laundry was perfectly done. "What are you talking about? I'm doing everything just like before. It's obviously clean, can't you see?" I argued. He's complaining about the food again. "Fried chicken, really? Can't you cook something different?" He complained. I didn't make fried chicken that often, and I tried to make different meals every day despite having limited time. I put effort into making your favorite fried chicken, and I make a variety of dishes, I defended myself. But whenever I tried to speak up, he got even angrier. "Are you saying you're too busy because of your part-time job? You're just pretending to be busy. Don't act like your job is important when it barely pays anything," he scolded. "You're only working because you're selfish. Your earnings were fine to begin with. Make sure you do the housework properly. Don't make excuses about not having time. It's embarrassing to work so hard for such a low wage." Steve always insulted my job with hurtful words. He used to say he wanted me to be a housewife so people wouldn't think we were struggling financially. But he constantly belittled my part-time job, bragging about how he made enough money that we didn't need to worry about expenses. Being constantly insulted for my work with such cruel words was unbearable. Every day, his words made me furious. One day, we decided to go visit Steve's parents' house, where we hadn't been in a while. Even though I had been annoyed with Steve for a long time, I was glad to get out of the house for a change. I didn't know what would happen when we got to his parents' house. After driving for a few hours, we got to Steve's parents' house. His mom, who lived alone, welcomed us with a smile. After dinner, which she cooked, Steve went out to play slot machines. While washing dishes with my mother-in-law, her mood changed. She wasn't as calm as before, and her face looked serious. As I made coffee, wondering what was wrong, we sat on the sofa, and she started talking. "Katie, according to Steve, you're working part-time. Why do you need to work when he has a good job? Also, he says you're not keeping up with the housework because you're too busy with your job," she said. I was taken aback by her sudden words. "No, that's not true. I'm handling everything just fine," I responded. My mother-in-law acted surprised, saying, "Oh, I've heard from Steve about how bad you are at housework. There's no point in lying. He's been dealing with this alone. He's exhausted from work, and it's sad that he has to come home to a messy house. You're not cooking proper meals, are you? Quit that part-time job. Your workplace won't miss you. They can find someone else. Your job is to take care of the house, okay? Focus on the house and support Steve properly from now on. Don't embarrass yourself as Steve's wife." My mother-in-law has traditional beliefs, thinking a wife should stay home. She got married right after school and never worked, always being a full-time housewife. Steve also grew up believing that's how a wife should be. That's why they both don't like the idea of me working outside. But my mother-in-law's words were too harsh. She not only dismissed my job. Those hurtful words really got to me. I was putting in so much effort at my part-time job, and everyone there was supportive and kind. It was a positive atmosphere, and I felt appreciated and relied upon. It broke my heart to hear myself talked about like I was useless, especially when my mother-in-law didn't even know anything about my job. And finding out that Steve had been saying bad things about me behind my back, despite me taking care of our home, was a shock. I was actually working harder than ever to make sure everything was in order, even with my part-time job. I knew Steve's job was tough, so I was doing my best to help out. But hearing him and his mother gossiping about me on the phone was hard to swallow. I didn't want to believe it. After hearing such awful things, I felt really down for a few days. But then, I remembered my father's face. Since my mother passed away, he'd been living alone in our family home. He lived a bit far from me, and I hadn't visited him recently because I'd been busy. I needed to hear his voice, so I called him. Usually he picks up right away, but that day, it rang for a long time. Just as I started to worry, he finally answered. "Katie, it's been a while. Are you well?" Hearing my father's calm voice, I felt a wave of relief, and tears began to flow. "What happened? It took you a long time to pick up the phone. If you're busy, I can call back later," I said. "No, I'm sorry. I recently fell down the stairs and hurt my back. I can't move around much now, but don't worry about me. I'll be okay soon. By the way, what's going on? Is everything okay?" he replied. I was really surprised. My dad, who used to be so active, had fallen down the stairs and hurt his back. "No, I'm okay. Just make sure you take care of yourself and get better soon. I'll come to visit you soon, so wait for me," I assured him. "Yeah, I'm okay," he said. But then I thought, he's already considered elderly and injuries might take longer to heal. I had always been reassured by his energy, but suddenly I felt worried. If he keeps using the stairs every day, he might slip again. Plus, the stairs in our old family home are a bit steep, and there are tall steps in the entrance and bathroom. I became really worried about my dad living there and taking care of his back. What if something bad happens and he gets seriously hurt? I couldn't just ignore it. I always thought it would be nice to live closer to him, but now I knew I had to act fast. I decided to build a safer, easier-to-use home for my dad nearby. I had some money from managing apartments that my grandfather left me. Originally, it was meant for my dad, but he put it in my name just in case. He told me to keep it quiet from my husband. I had saved all the rent money until now. I wanted to use that money to build a new house for my dad. I felt really happy thinking about giving him such a great gift, especially since I hadn't been able to do much to help him before. Building the house would cost a lot of money, and I couldn't just keep it a secret. I needed to talk to Steve about it. I was nervous he might not agree and might get upset, but instead he said, "I understand. It makes sense to get him a new house, especially considering his age. If you think you can handle it, go for it. Just don't expect me to help if things get tough." He insulted me again, which made me angry, but arguing would only make things worse. So I decided not to argue back this time. It made things simpler for me. I immediately started looking for a good contractor and began the process of building the new house. But it seemed like Steve wasn't happy with the idea of me actually going through with it. He didn't say anything, so I tried not to pay too much attention to it. But he usually wasn't the type to keep quiet. One day, I was shocked when I went to the bank to take out money for groceries. $3,000 was missing from our living expenses, all taken out at once. I couldn't remember spending such a big amount of money. There was only one person who could have done this. It was hard to believe that Steve would take the money without asking, but it was clear that the money was gone. That night, I confronted him. When I went to the bank today, I saw that $3,000 was taken out from our living expenses. "Do you know anything about this?" I asked. Steve arrogantly replied, "I gave it to my mother. You said you were going to build a house, so you must have been saving up somewhere, right? $3,000 isn't a big deal." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why did you give her money? Your mother isn't exactly struggling, is she? And that's our living expenses. It's not fair to give away such a big amount without even talking to me about it," I argued. He snapped back. "What do you know about my mother? She said she needed help. What's wrong with a son helping his mother? Plus, that money was earned by me. How I use it is none of your business. If it bothers you, try earning as much as I do with your part-time job. You can't say anything now, can you? Don't ever complain about what I do again." After shouting at me, he stormed out of the room. I always believed Steve wouldn't betray me, even with his harsh words. It would have been better if he had talked to me about it. Maybe there could have been a better way to help his mother without causing this argument. Did he think I'd say no, or did he not trust me? Instead of our marriage making us closer, it felt like we were growing apart. Steve didn't see anything wrong with using the money without asking. The next day, he acted like nothing happened and went to work after breakfast. I didn't say more because I didn't want another fight, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Meanwhile, the new house was finally done. Despite the business, the construction company was really helpful, and I managed to build a beautiful house. I asked my dad to pack some of his things, but I didn't want him to strain himself, so I hired movers to handle it all for him. With just 2 weeks left until moving day, I was filled with joy thinking about how I could do something special for my dad in the house I had built. On the day, we planned to help my dad unpack in the new house. Along with Steve, I tried to talk about the arrangements, but then Steve said something shocking. "Hey, that house isn't for your dad. It's going to be for my mom. I have the right to decide who lives in the house I helped build, so it's going to be my mom," he said firmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In a panic, I replied, "I built that house. It's for my dad. There's no way you, with your part-time job, could have built it. It's my money that paid for it, so don't act so entitled." It seems like he genuinely believed that it was his money that built the house. When we talked about building it before, he seemed fine with the idea. But now it looks like he planned from the start to make it for his mother, not my dad. That's really unfair. Now I have to prove that I used my own money to build it. I had no choice but to tell him about the rental income I kept hidden until now. I decided to come clean about it. "You're making up stories just because you want the house for yourself. If you're going to lie, at least make it believable," he scoffed. He didn't believe me at all and stormed off somewhere. I was at a loss, but I had to make him understand. While waiting for him to return, he came back looking incredibly angry and then said, "You tried to trick me, saying you built that house. You're a liar. That house is mine because I helped build it. You need to leave, even if we break up. I don't think you can survive on your part-time salary." I was speechless at the sudden turn of events. That house was built with my hard work, and being told to leave so abruptly was too much. "Sign this and get out tonight," he laughed as he slammed divorce papers on the table and headed to his room. His part was already filled out. After constantly putting me down, presenting the divorce papers like that was the lowest he could go. He must have done this awful thing to make me feel hopeless. Maybe he thought bringing up divorce would make me cave in and let his mother live in the house. But little did he know, I had enough money to live on my own without him. This was the final straw for me. I signed the papers and submitted them, then quickly packed my bags and left for my dad's house. My dad was surprised to see me arriving with so much luggage all of a sudden, but he warmly welcomed me in. After I explained everything that had happened, he patted my back and said, "You've been through a lot. You can stay with me in the new house." That would make me happy. Moving day came and everything went smoothly because I was there. We successfully moved in without any issues. I found it a bit strange that my ex-husband hadn't reached out after causing such a scene, claiming the house was his. But I tried not to worry about it because I didn't want to think about someone I was divorced from. A few days after settling into our new home with my father, something unbelievable happened. There was a commotion outside, and when I looked out the window, I saw a big moving truck parked outside, claiming they were moving into our house. I rushed outside to talk to the movers and figure out what was going on. It turned out that the customer was actually my ex-husband, and he was planning to move in with his mother. They wanted to forcefully take over the house where my father and I were already living. Since we were divorced, he was basically a stranger to me now, and it would be a big problem if they just showed up like that. I felt a chilling kind of fear about my ex-husband's aggressive intentions. I explained the situation to the confused movers and asked them to stop their work. Then I talked to my father and quickly called the police. When I told the police what was happening, they confirmed that the house was my property. Since my ex-husband and I were divorced, he had no right to live there, and entering against my will could be considered trespassing. Soon, my ex-husband and his mother arrived. When they saw the police, they started to panic. It finally dawned on him that I was the one who built the house. But with his mother freaking out beside him and the police bombarding him with questions, he lost his cool and yelled, "What's going on? Why can't I live in this house?" Looking at him, I realized I was done dealing with such a person. But to protect my father and myself, I handed over the final piece of evidence to the police. Although the situation calmed down thanks to their intervention, I later heard that my ex-husband faced serious consequences. He was so serious about living in the house that he canceled his apartment lease and even sold his mother's house, leaving him with no place to go. With a breach of contract fee demanded by the movers and a truckload of belongings, he found himself stranded on the street with his mother. The final piece of evidence I gave to the police was footage of the verbal abuse, essentially domestic violence, that my ex-husband subjected me to. Unable to endure his abusive language any longer, I had installed surveillance cameras to record everything. The footage showed me diligently doing housework while he constantly spewed unreasonable abuse. Using this evidence, I managed to further corner him. I hired a lawyer and sued him, eventually extracting a settlement. The expenses from the moving chaos and the settlement depleted the money he got from selling his mother's house and his own savings. Now he and his mother are reportedly living in a rundown apartment. Word of this spread quickly at his workplace. Realizing there was something wrong with his character, his colleagues distanced themselves, and now he is isolated and frowned upon by everyone at the company. As for me, I finally got to adopt a cat. My father's back has completely healed, and we're discussing taking a trip with the cat. I also used the settlement money to open a shop dealing with cat goods. It was challenging at first, and there were failures, but gradually customers increased and the business is thriving. Every day is peaceful and truly enjoyable. I never thought that the action I took for my father's sake would lead to my own happiness. I truly feel that it was the right decision. Recently, there has been a happy development. A man who always comes to my shop and chats pleasantly has been particularly kind to both people and cats. We've made plans to go for a drive together. I'm going to live my life freely and enjoyably. I'm excited about the new happiness that's about to begin.
I'm Karen, a 25-year-old employee. And 6 months ago, my grandfather, who raised me, passed away. Today is the day when the lawyer will open my grandfather's will, prompting my visit to his house with my sister Susan. Susan, 4 years older than me, is my only family since our parents passed away in an accident 20 years ago. Raised by our grandparents, we faced the loss of our grandmother to illness a few years ago, and our grandfather's health had been declining ever since. Concerned for him, I chose to live in an apartment near his house, regularly checking on him. "You're a grown woman. It's unbecoming to keep coming back home," my grandfather would say cheerfully. But despite his words, I continued my visits. One day, arriving as usual, I discovered my grandfather in pain at the entrance. In a panic, I called an ambulance, but he passed away suddenly. "Hey, what are you daydreaming for? At least prepare some tea." My sister Susan's voice brought me back to reality. "Right, the lawyer will be here soon," I replied, heading to the kitchen. Glancing at Susan stretching out her legs on the mat and yawning, I could still smell her strong perfume from a distance. "She's the same as always," I murmured as I placed the kettle on the stove. My sister had always been self-centered, dyeing her hair in her teens and hanging out with delinquents. She demanded money without working, causing trouble that our grandparents had to apologize for, leaving me to deal with the fallout as the quiet one. Even as an adult with no stable job, she drifted around, working part-time. I knew she had been asking our grandfather for money in my absence, finding the situation troublesome. If it weren't for the inheritance, I thought, interrupted by Susan's formal greeting to the arriving lawyer. "Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for coming today," she said in her high-pitched voice. Rushing to join them, I thanked the lawyer for his presence, recalling his kind eyes that mirrored my grandfather's. The lawyer's badge gleamed brightly on his chest as we began the process after offering incense in front of my grandfather's portrait. He took a sip of the tea, marking the beginning of a significant and uncertain chapter in our lives. I retrieved my grandfather's will, a document entrusted to him while he was still alive. Its contents revealed that my elder sister Susan was to inherit $20 million in cash, while I, the younger daughter, would inherit the house and the land it stood on. Upon hearing this, Susan burst into laughter, finding it amusing that she was to receive a substantial sum while I, the younger and supposedly plainer sister, would only inherit an old house. "It's just right for someone as plain as you," she remarked snidely. I retorted, pointing out that it wasn't just the house but also the land. She dismissed the value of the land in such a seemingly undesirable location, expressing a preference for cash. I couldn't deny feeling a bit shocked, acknowledging that perhaps my grandfather wanted me to protect his cherished house and land, where he spent his life with my grandmother. "Wow, a house and land. That's pretty awesome, isn't it, Brian?" my boyfriend exclaimed in surprise upon hearing my story. Shaking my head, I implied that it wasn't as great as it sounded, given that my sister inherited $20 million in cash. "More impressive, I'd say," I remarked, feeling a sense of emptiness as I verbalized it. Trying to be modest, I continued, even though I was trying to be modest. "Beautiful and having money, now she's the more, the better," Brian remarked insensitively, earning a side glance from me. Realizing his mistake, he jokingly added, "Your comfort means more to me than money." Brian had been my boyfriend since I started working, and we met at a social event. Although he hadn't proposed yet, I had been considering marriage, and today was our first date in the wild. I ended up sharing details about my inheritance with Brian, thinking he might become my husband someday. Little did I know that I would come to regret this. A few days later, as I visited the family home I had inherited, I planned to clean and sort out my grandfather's belongings. The property was large, but the house was modest. Contemplating the idea of moving in and living here leisurely with a cat, I considered the absence of rent payments, despite potential maintenance costs for deterioration. I had been working hard and saving, so it shouldn't be a problem. Someday, maybe with Brian. Feeling embarrassed at the thought, I shook my head vigorously and rolled up my sleeves to begin cleaning. Just then, I received a call, and my sister's name appeared on my smartphone screen. "Sis, what's up?" "Hey, Karen, having fun all by yourself in that old house?" My sister slurred, clearly intoxicated. She always had a unique way of extending her words, but today it was particularly bad. "Since you're drinking, aren't you?" "It's still afternoon," I pointed out with a sigh, to which she exaggeratedly sighed back. "Oh, you're such a Miss Goody Two-Shoes." "I was thinking about moving here eventually," I answered my sister's question, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Really? I'm enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel right now," my sister raised her voice, sounding somewhat exaggerated. "Guess who I'm with right now?" "I have no idea," I replied, finding the situation rather boring. "It's that kind of attitude that'll make Brian dislike you," my sister quipped. "What? I'm sorry, Karen." I was flabbergasted when Brian's voice suddenly took over the line. The sudden intervention of Brian threw me off balance, and dizzying question marks popped up in my head. I resented my imagination at this point. A disgusting scenario had been completed in my head. Surprised, "Huh?" my sister's mean-spirited voice chimed in. "Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch." She went on to boast about how she had been attracted to Brian since I introduced him, how she knew where he worked because of me, and how she had approached him as soon as he left work. He came along readily when she asked, telling her that she was hundreds of times more attractive than me. I listened in stunned silence, unable to utter a word. "Karen, I'm really sorry," Brian's voice came again. "Tell me it's a mistake." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. As a man, I had to take this opportunity. I do feel bad about it, but come on, it's impossible to resist a beautiful woman who has $20 million, right? The way he spoke, as if asking me to understand, drained my emotions away, and I felt a cold sensation, like my blood was being drained from me. "You know what? I don't need a man like you," I finally said, and I could hear my sister laughing uproariously in the background. The voice on the phone changed back to my sister. Well, that's how it is. And from now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke, she added before abruptly ending the call. Overwhelmed by emotions that had lied behind, all I could do was cry. It had been 5 years since that fateful call as I sat with a cat in my lap, dozing off in front of my laptop. The cat also peacefully slept. It was my day off, but there was still some work left from where I brought home. Oh no, this won't get the work done, I thought to myself, feeling guilty. But I had to gently move the cat off my lap. Just as I reached out to my laptop, my phone started to ring. An unfamiliar number was displayed on my smartphone. Thinking it could be work-related, I answered the call without any suspicion. Hello, Karen, long time no see. I instantly knew who it was and froze. The distinctive way of speaking was unmistakably my sister's. It's you, Karen, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister. 5 years had passed, which should make Susan 34 years old. A smirk formed at the corner of my mouth at her unchanging way of talking. You're just the same. By the way, I came home, and there's a hotel standing. Did you sell a house? That's none of your business. Oh, come on. It's quite a grand hotel, huh? You must have made a good chunk of change, huh? Getting fed up? I was about to end the call when she started to chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she had blown through the inheritance in about 2 years, and now she even had a considerable amount of debt. Even Brian, who she's still hanging around, seemed to be drowning in debt. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. So, lend me some money, Susan requested, yelling. But I answered calmly, I've always wondered why Grandpa distributed his estate that way. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I understood. I started talking slowly, reminiscing about 5 years ago when Brian broke up with me, leaving me crushed. After crying my heart out, I sat dazed in my room, staring into space. I'm such a fool, I murmured, and large tears began to spill again. My gaze fell on a painting I had made as a child and had gifted to my grandfather. He had framed it and kept it hanging lovingly. Rising unsteadily, I picked up the painting. Grandpa. As I continued, my emotions swelled, and I started to cry. I recalled the notes my grandfather and I used to exchange on the back of that painting, like a family journal. Knowing that I was to inherit the house, he probably figured. I found this note. I'm glad I noticed, I said, shuddering at the thought that I might have left it unnoticed. I reached for a sheet of notepaper that had fallen from the back of the frame, with the note addressed to me. The date on the letter was just before my grandfather passed. I knew you'd definitely notice this letter. Right now, you're probably wondering why I distributed my estate in such a manner. I read aloud. Cash to you, a sister, and an old house and land for you. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not the case, the letter revealed, finally answering the question that had been bothering me. Despite any claims of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, bouqueted for me till the end. I finally understood what had been bothering me, and I continued to read the letter. But Susan would not be satisfied with a regular division. This child, even as her grandfather, I must admit, she's terribly greedy. Exactly, Grandpa? I whispered in agreement, though he couldn't hear me. She even took my boyfriend from me. That's what I want to tell him in my heart. That's why I arranged it this way, I read. While Susan may appear to have received the better deal at first glance, she won't pay attention to your share. According to Grandfather's letter, the value of this land in our area is continuously increasing due to ongoing urban development. As of the time I'm writing this, it's not worth Susan's $20 million yet, but the value of this land will surely increase in the future. As I read this far, my eyes widened in surprise. You can live here if you're attached to it, or you can sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. All I want is for you to be happy, Grandfather's letter had said. When I finished conveying the content of the letter, Susan clicked her tongue and said, Hag. I lived in that house for a while, but when my marriage was settled, I decided to sell the house. Just like grandfather's letter said, the land value had risen enough. Anyway, I'm never lending you money, Susan declared. But as if she had a good idea, she added, right. If you want, I can give Brian back to you. So help your sister. It's a good deal, right? At this moment, something inside me snapped. Enough was enough. You've been taken care of by my grandpa, and yet you haven't shown a hint of gratitude. I despise you for that, and you're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good. I said what I needed to say and hung up. I quickly set up call blocking, and my cat on my lap was cowering on the bed. I quickly picked up my cat and said, I'm sorry. After that, it seems Susan contacted Brian, and they both stormed into our old house. Did they try to return Brian to me? There's a respectable end there now, but they must have misunderstood something and were shouting that they were my relatives. Even though I just sold the land and had nothing to do with it, it's simple for those two. I sold the land, and an inn was built equals I must be the owner of the inn. Of course, the staff reported to the police. The two of them were arrested because they had destroyed several items in the inn. Furthermore, it was discovered that they had been committing marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I was able to prove that I had no involvement. Quickly, as we were estranged, I was released. As my husband, who came to pick me up, and I were walking through the station, we heard screaming and turned our gaze. There were Susan and Brian, who looked completely different. Fortunately, they didn't notice us. Both of them had messy hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the two people I remember. Especially Susan, who never skipped her makeup and fashion, looked even more different. They were probably being moved to a different location. As I watched the two of them, filled with a sense of melancholy, my husband and I locked eyes. I grabbed the hand he extended, and we left the police station. Are you okay? My husband, always concerned, looked at me with gentle eyes. I'm okay. I have you and this little one. I touched my fairly noticeable belly and smiled back. In my belly, a new member of our family is growing. Money is important, but there's something even more valuable. That's what I want to teach our child, with my husband by my side.
Hello, everyone. I'm Susan, and at 33 years old, I found myself grappling with significant personal challenges in the realm of love. After the disappointing end of my first marriage, I made a promise to protect my emotional well-being and steer clear of toxic relationships. Embracing a journey of self-healing and personal growth, I was determined to create a fulfilling partnership that would nourish my spirit. When I met my second husband, he seemed like the perfect match I had always envisioned. We shared a deep connection, and I truly believe we were meant to be together. However, as our relationship deepened, I encountered an unexpected hurdle: my mother-in-law, Carolyn. Her presence became a constant test of my resilience and strength. From the beginning, Carolyn tried to insert herself into our lives. She scrutinized my every move, critiqued my choices, and even attempted to dictate our decisions as a couple. But I stood firm. Having invested so much in my happiness, I refused to let anyone, even a mother-in-law, disrupt the peace I had fought so hard to create. Drawing from my journey of self-discovery, I confronted Carolyn directly, making it clear that her interference was unwelcome. My resolve was met with resistance. Carolyn was a formidable opponent, challenging my boundaries at every turn. Her persistent overreach, including inappropriate comments about joining us on our honeymoon, highlighted her lack of respect for our independence. Determined to uphold the boundaries I had established, I knew it was time to teach Carolyn a lesson about respecting limits. This was essential for her to understand the consequences of her actions. Carolyn's behavior was more than a personal annoyance. It threatened the stability of my marriage, and I was prepared to protect it at all costs. As I navigated these new challenges, I found myself grappling with her overbearing nature. Carolyn had a peculiar way of showing her affection, often overshadowing our moments with her excessive involvement. During family gatherings, which were typically relaxed backyard barbecues, she would often joke about joining us on our honeymoon to capture beautiful moments, or teasingly suggest she might take my place next to Stephen. At first, I dismissed these comments as harmless fun, laughing them off like everyone else. However, her relentless jokes hinted at something deeper. Was she truly joking? The idea seemed absurd. What kind of mother-in-law would genuinely consider intruding on her son's honeymoon? But as time passed, I began to realize that Carolyn might be more serious than I initially thought. This realization hit me hard on my wedding day as I prepared in the dressing room, excitement coursing through me for the life ahead with Stephen. The room buzzed with joy and anticipation when suddenly the door swung open and Carolyn's imposing figure appeared, casting a shadow over the festivities. I turned to face her, trying to keep my smile intact despite the unease growing within me. Without hesitation, Carolyn launched into conversation. "Susan, I need to talk to you," she began, her gaze intense. "Are you truly happy?" Her question caught me off guard. Of course, I was happy, overjoyed, in fact. Stephen was the love of my life, and our wedding was a celebration of our mutual affection and commitment. "I couldn't be happier," I replied, my voice brimming with sincerity. "Stephen and I are thrilled to be starting our lives together." This encounter was just another example of how Carolyn's presence could be unsettling and oddly direct, challenging the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. As I eagerly anticipated our honeymoon, a well-deserved break after months of meticulous planning, I was unaware that Carolyn had other ideas. As I adjusted my veil in the mirror, Carolyn leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a mischievous whisper. "About the honeymoon, I've decided to come along. It'll be a surprise for Stephen, but let's keep it between us." Her words crashed over me like a wave. Was she serious? "Wait, Carolyn, are you really planning to join us on our honeymoon?" I asked, hoping for clarity or reassurance that this was just another of her peculiar jokes. Carolyn's face was a mask of determination. "Yes, Susan. I've always dreamed of experiencing a romantic getaway like this. I'm his mother, and I've been there for all his milestones. It's important for me to be there. It'll be a bonding experience for all of us." Her words struck me with their audacity. Our honeymoon was meant to be a private journey for Stephen and me, a sacred opportunity to create intimate memories as a newly married couple, not a family excursion. I struggled to find the right words, fighting to keep my composure. I replied, "Carolyn, this is our honeymoon. It's a time for us to deepen our bond and focus solely on each other. While I appreciate your enthusiasm, it's crucial to respect our boundaries." Her expression shifted from surprise to disappointment, clearly not expecting my firm objection. "Susan, I only want what's best for Stephen. I thought this would be a special surprise for him, a way to bring us closer as a family." Taking a deep breath, I summoned the inner strength I had cultivated through my journey of self-discovery. "Carolyn, I understand and respect your love for Stephen, but our honeymoon is sacred. It's a time for us to nurture our relationship and create memories that will lay the foundation for our future together." Stating my ground was essential, not just for our honeymoon, but for establishing a tone of respect and independence in our marriage. I hoped Carolyn would accept our wishes, but the tension thickened in the air as she processed that her plans had been thwarted. It was a defining moment, a test of our new dynamic, and in that instant, I felt empowered, having taken a crucial step in safeguarding my marriage and establishing a foundation of love and respect. You might think that would be the end of the story, right? Unfortunately, my friends, it didn't stop there. As the day of our departure approached, excitement and nervousness fluttered in my heart. Stephen and I were on the verge of embarking on our eagerly awaited honeymoon, a chance to relax and revel in our newlywed bliss. However, a looming storm threatened to overshadow our joy. It was the morning we were set to leave when Carolyn's name appeared on my phone. Taking a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself for whatever she might say. "Hello, Carolyn. Dear, I've decided to join you and Stephen on your honeymoon. Isn't that thrilling?" Her voice chirped through the phone, sending a wave of frustration over me. Hadn't we already settled this? My voice tightened with exasperation as I responded, "Carolyn, we've been through this. This honeymoon is a special time for Stephen and me. We need space to strengthen our relationship as a married couple." Her reply was casual, almost dismissive of my concerns. "Yes, dear, but I've made up my mind. I'm coming along. It'll be a grand adventure for all of us. You'll see." With my patience thinning, I asserted more firmly, Carolyn, this isn't up for negotiation. Stephen and I planned this trip as a private getaway. You need to respect that boundary. A tense silence followed, punctuated only by the distant hum of anticipation. I sensed Carolyn's frustration mounting, but I stood firm in my refusal. Don't be so dramatic, Susan. Now tell me, you two are going to Switzerland, right? I've already booked my ticket. I know it was last minute, so I won't be on the same flight, but I'll meet you there. Her words echoed in my mind, but they also presented an opportunity, a chance to steer Carolyn's plans away to reclaim our honeymoon as the sacred space it was meant to be for Stephen and me. I believed that everyone could learn and change, but sometimes it took a bold move to spark that transformation. I was ready to make the move that would ensure our honeymoon remained ours alone. I had already made it clear to Carolyn that I wasn't interested in engaging in a tiresome back and forth with my in-laws. I needed to maintain the peace, so when faced with her unwavering determination to join us, I decided to take a creative approach to protect our private time. Keeping my cool and masking my frustration, I responded with a quick bit of thinking. Actually, Carolyn, there seems to be a misunderstanding. We're headed to New Zealand, not Switzerland. Her reaction was immediate, a gasp escaping her as she processed the sudden twist. Oh my, I must have misunderstood. Yes, I'll need to change my flight right away. Thank you for letting me know, Susan. Absolutely. Change that flight to Auckland, New Zealand, I replied, adding a subtle nudge. And yes, last-minute changes can be pricey, but I know you'd do anything for Stephen. Little did she know, Stephen and I were actually bound for Switzerland. I felt no remorse for the deception. It was a necessary act to preserve our much-needed privacy. Carolyn hurried off to adjust her travel plans, and as I ended the call, a slight smile spread across my face. For now, our honeymoon was safe from any unwanted interference. With each passing minute, my sense of relief grew. Stephen and I were free to start our journey without the looming presence of Carolyn's meddling. It was a small victory, but a significant one, proving my resolve to protect what was sacred to us. As our plane descended into Switzerland, the excitement between us was palpable. The breathtaking landscapes, historic architecture, and vibrant culture awaited us. Stepping off the plane, Stephen exclaimed in awe, Susan, look at this view. Can you believe we're actually in Switzerland? It's even more beautiful than I imagined. I know, Stephen. It feels like we've stepped right into a fairy tale. I can't wait to explore everything, I replied, equally enchanted by the setting. We arrived at our charming hotel in the heart of Geneva, immediately taken by its elegant decor and cozy ambience. The city buzzed with history, art, and music, and we were eager to dive into this cultural feast. This hotel is incredible, Susan. Great choice, Stephen remarked, appreciating the atmosphere that promised to make our honeymoon memorable. Indeed, we're here to immerse ourselves in the beauty of Geneva, celebrating our new life together in a place as magical as our dreams. I'm really glad you like it, babe. I wanted our stay to be perfect, I responded, thrilled by Stephen's appreciation. As soon as we arrived, our excitement overcame our weariness. Hand in hand, we walked through the enchanting streets of Geneva, soaking in the grandeur of the Palais des Nations and savoring delicious confections from the charming local cafes. Stephen, can you believe the beauty of this place? The Alps are breathtaking, I exclaimed, my heart full of joy. I'm blown away, Susan. This is a dream come true. Thank you for planning such an amazing honeymoon, Stephen exclaimed, his eyes shining with happiness. Exhausted but fulfilled, we returned to our hotel, deciding to rest before continuing our adventure. As Stephen headed for the shower, my phone rang. It was Carolyn. Hey, Carolyn, that's great. I hope you have a safe flight, I said, trying to keep my tone upbeat. Oh my gosh, I can hardly contain my excitement. I can't believe you're actually joining us in Auckland. We're going to have the most incredible time together at the Oceanfront Hotel. You won't believe the breathtaking views of the harbor. Carolyn gushed. I maintained my facade with enthusiasm. Oh dear Carolyn, I'm equally thrilled to embark on this adventure with you. I'm so glad you finally came to your senses and saw the beauty in me tagging along on your honeymoon. I knew you'd be understanding, Carolyn replied, her voice brimming with satisfaction. I rolled my eyes but kept up the act. Absolutely, Carolyn. You're so right. The flight may be a bit tiresome, but trust me, Auckland will captivate your heart with its vibrant cityscape, the iconic opera house, and stunning beaches. You'll be in awe. Oh, that sounds marvelous. I simply can't wait to experience it all. Susan, I hope Steven is ready for some quality mother-son bonding time. This trip will give us a chance to connect on a deeper level, she continued, blissfully unaware of the mix-up. Carolyn, when Steven sees you, be over the moon. It's going to be an unforgettable journey filled with laughter, exploration, and beautiful memories, I assured her, masking my true feelings about the situation. That warms my heart, Susan. I'm eager to create lasting memories with both of you. Rest assured, once I land in Auckland, I'll reach out to you immediately. That will be our signal to commence this grand adventure, Carolyn concluded. Perfect, Carolyn. The moment you touch down, give me a call and we'll coordinate our plans, I said, ending the call with a sense of relief, knowing our actual destination remained just between Steven and me. As I hung up, a playful twinge of mischief washed over me. The thought of Carolyn discovering we were actually in Switzerland, not New Zealand, sparked gleeful anticipation within me. I hope this mix-up would serve as a powerful lesson in respecting boundaries and allowing my marriage to Steven to blossom without her overbearing involvement. The prospect of Carolyn's forthcoming surprise added an exciting layer to our Swiss adventure, heightening the joy bubbling in my spirit. It felt a bit like a game, but the desire to share an unencumbered journey with Steven, crafting memories meant just for us, was too enticing to resist. However, as I hung up, a mix of relief and anxiety began to settle in. Steven emerged from the shower, noticing my distracted state. "What's going on?" he asked, sensing the shift in my mood. My initial delight faded, replaced by a twinge of guilt about the entire escapade. I hadn't fully considered how Steven might feel about the deceptive tactic I employed against his mother. The last thing I wanted was to sow seeds of deceit at the start of our new life together. Taking a deep breath, I decided it was time to come clean. "Steven, I have to confess something," I began, the words heavy on my tongue. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern etching his brow. "Not exactly," I admitted. "You know how Carolyn always joked about tagging along on our honeymoon? Well, she was serious. She intended to join us." His expression shifted from worry to disbelief. "What the hell?" I told her that was out of the question because this time is meant for just us. "I know," I said, my voice faltering, but she wouldn't take no for an answer, so I mistled her about our destination. Instead of arguing, I told her we were going to Auckland, hoping it would keep her from intruding on our privacy. I recounted the whole story, apologizing at every turn. I didn't want Steven to think I was manipulative or cruel. I simply wanted to safeguard our time together from his mother's overbearing ways. He was silent for a moment after I finished, leaving me anxious about his reaction. Then, to my surprise, he burst into laughter, his genuine amusement filling the room and easing my tension. "You sly fox, Susan. I can't believe you did that. Honestly, it's a relief. My mom's interference has always been exhausting. Now we can truly enjoy our time together." "Wait, so you're not mad?" I asked, surprised yet relieved. "I'm not thrilled about sending her to a foreign country," he chuckled, "but I find the whole situation hilarious. I'm just picturing her face when she realizes the mix-up." We both laughed together, feeling a renewed sense of unity. With the weight of the situation lightened, we immersed ourselves in the beauty of Switzerland, exploring its rich history, breathtaking landscapes, and vibrant culture. Each moment deepened our bond and created cherished memories. Meanwhile, Carolyn remained blissfully unaware that her son found the situation amusing and was in on the ruse. Exhausted from her flight, she called us, expecting us to pick her up from the airport. "Hey, Carolyn, Steven and I are together right now. There's something you need to know. We're not in New Zealand. We're actually in Switzerland," I said, putting the phone on speaker. "But you said Auckland, the oceanfront hotel," Carolyn stammered, confusion evident in her voice. "Yeah, that was all a trick, Carolyn. Sorry about that, but you really needed to learn," I explained firmly. "A trick for what? What did I do?" she exclaimed, disbelief rising in her tone. "You kept trying to insert yourself into our honeymoon? What kind of mother does that? When you insisted on tagging along, instead of fighting with you about it, I decided to let you believe what you wanted. This way, I could enjoy some quality time with my husband." "How could you do this, Susan? I trusted you. You're no good for my son." Carolyn's hurt was palpable. Steven, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. "Mom, it's time you understand that meddling in our lives and disregarding Susan's boundaries has consequences." This was her way of setting a boundary. "What? You too?" Carolyn's voice cracked as she absorbed his stance. This moment, fraught with tension, underscored our commitment to each other and the importance of respecting our new family unit. I can't believe you're taking her side. I can't believe you've deceived me like this. I raised you. I've been there for you through everything. Carolyn's voice trembled with hurt. Mom, this isn't about deception. It's about setting boundaries, I replied, trying to convey the necessity of our actions. Susan and I are building our lives together. You must respect our choices and let us forge our path. We love you, but maintaining healthy boundaries is key. Her voice echoed through the phone, loud enough to attract attention nearby. You've humiliated me. I can't believe my son would turn against me like this. Carolyn, please try to see where we're coming from, I urged, my tone steady yet empathetic. This wasn't done to embarrass you. We need to make it clear that we require our own space and independence. It's time for you to let us build our lives and respect the boundaries we've established. I don't want to hear it. You both are selfish and ungrateful. She shot back, her frustration palpable. Call me back when you're ready to have a real conversation. With that, she abruptly ended the call, leaving herself likely bewildered and upset at the airport. While I might have felt guilty, instead, I felt relieved. Standing up for our marriage's boundaries was necessary, even if uncomfortable. Wanting privacy in our honeymoon wasn't unreasonable. It was unusual for a mother to insist on tagging along. Stephen, are you all right with how things turned out? I asked, concerned about his feelings. Yes, Susan, don't worry about Mom. She's embarrassed and frustrated, but maybe this will finally show her that her behavior isn't okay. She needs to respect our boundaries, whether she likes it or not, he reassured me, his tone resolute yet caring. As we continued our honeymoon in Switzerland, enjoying the stunning vistas and cultural delights, the issue with Carolyn receded into the background. We decided she would contact us when she was ready to reconcile, and perhaps she would make something of her unplanned trip to New Zealand. Regardless, I felt confident she'd think twice before trying to interfere with our plans in the future.
I find myself entangled in a rather perplexing situation as I consider approaching your father regarding a troubling incident related to a potential mugging of my own father. Indeed, suspicions have arisen concerning your father's involvement in this alleged mugging. Currently, he is situated at home. Would you be open to allowing me a brief audience with him for an inquiry? The police officer displayed a momentary sense of bewilderment in response to my request, his expression betraying a subtle confusion. Despite this, he eventually agreed, stating, "Please, let me see him." Consequently, I led the police officer into the confines of my home, unlocking the door to reveal my father's presence. Upon beholding my father, the police officer was visibly taken aback by the unexpected revelation. This incident transpired a few months ago, and as I reflect upon it, I feel compelled to share a bit more about myself. My name is David, and I am currently a fourth-year university student. Despite my aspirations to work for a prominent company, there lingers an unresolved dilemma within me. The decision revolves around whether or not to inherit my father's company. You see, my father holds the esteemed position of president at a modest factory. During my formative years, I harbored a desire to follow in my father's footsteps, aspiring to become a president like him. However, as I entered my rebellious phase, I distanced myself from this ambition, feeling a sense of embarrassment towards my father perpetually adorned in work clothes stained with oil. This sentiment persisted through my teenage years and, to some extent, endures even now. As I matured into adulthood and engaged in part-time employment, my perspective on my father began to shift. I developed a newfound respect for his tireless work ethic, which sustained not only our family but also supported numerous employees and their families. Yet despite this growing admiration, an underlying sentiment lingered. A perception that the conventional salaryman, donned in a suit and toiling diligently, possessed a certain allure absent in my father's occupation. The narrative takes an intriguing turn when, during a shopping excursion with my father, we were unexpectedly hailed from behind. Turning together, my father and I encountered Richard, a contemporary of my father's from high school. Dressed in a suit and on an external sales trip, Richard hailed from a prestigious corporation. In the course of our conversation, Richard casually inquired if my father had indeed assumed control of the family business. This revelation prompted Richard to express disdain for what he referred to as the dirty little factory managed by my father, emphasizing the incredulity that a high school graduate could rise to the position of president. Stunned by Richard's derogatory remarks, I found myself grappling with the realization that the factory in question was initiated by my grandfather, making my father the second-generation custodian of this familial legacy. I had long been aware that he had assumed control after graduating from high school. However, the revelation of a classmate mocking him caught me off guard. Richard maintained a silent smile while addressing my father. "So, did you manage to expand your father's factory? You did mention during high school that you intended to take over the company and make it bigger." To this, my father admitted, "Unfortunately, I lacked the business acumen, and that dream didn't materialize. It seemed inevitable that I excelled in practical skills but lagged behind in intellectual pursuits. Nonetheless, I felt relieved that our family didn't face financial ruin." Richard chuckled heartily, playfully slapping my father on the shoulder. "Well, David, we'll catch up at the next reunion. I've got more work to do," he added before leaving. My father looked slightly uncomfortable, prompting me to redirect the conversation. Suggesting a change of topic, my father proposed that we continue shopping. At that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father's work had been belittled without any response from me. The internal debate about whether to take over my father's company or pursue a career at a prestigious corporation leaned decisively toward the latter. A few weeks later, fate intervened as my father's alumni association event took place at the bar where I worked part-time. Despite the bustling atmosphere, I managed to serve at the table hosting my father's gathering. Fulfilling my duties silently, I approached the room where the alumni association was held. My father warmly greeted me, introducing me as his son to those present. Though similar in appearance, I maintained a serious demeanor, responding awkwardly to the teasing of my father's inebriated classmates. Richard, seated nearby, noticed our interaction and remarked, "We met recently too, David, right? Are you planning to take over your father's small factory?" This question added another layer to my ongoing contemplation of my professional path. When I truthfully admitted to still contemplating my decision, an unpleasant alcoholic breath emanated from Richard, leaving me repulsed. Boisterously, he exclaimed, "Stop it. Your father's company is nothing extraordinary. David should consider working for a company like mine instead of inheriting such a lackluster business." Despite his inebriated state, Richard proceeded to boast about his professional achievements, narrating a career history that began as a mere assistant but now claimed the head of accounting position. A sense of unease crept over me as I sensed discrepancies in his narrative. I sensed that something was amiss, but I chose to keep my concerns to myself, wary of potential complications that might arise from challenging him. My father, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by Richard's inebriation and, in fact, found the situation amusing. With a lighter mood due to his own inebriation, he asked Richard about changes in his department since their last encounter a few weeks ago. Questioning the sudden shift from sales to accounting, my father caught Richard off guard. Eventually, Richard admitted to an abrupt transfer, asserting that sales wasn't his forte. However, my father pointed out the incongruity in Richard's story, revealing that the company Richard proudly spoke of had actually been absorbed by a foreign corporation, with its accounting department relocated overseas. Laughter erupted among the party attendees as Richard, now embarrassed and regretful, attempted to save face but ultimately decided to leave the gathering with heavy footsteps. Witnessing my father's ability to address the uncomfortable truth that others had noticed but hesitated to mention, I found a sense of pride in his candor, even in his intoxicated state. As half a year passed since that incident, my internal dilemma regarding whether or not to take over my father's company only intensified. The confusion deepened with each passing day, leaving me uncertain about the path I should pursue. One day, while relaxing at home, the intercom interrupted my contemplation. In the absence of my mother, I answered the door to find a visitor in uniformed clothes identifying themselves as a police officer. Surprised and apprehensive, I responded with a stiff voice, wondering if I had inadvertently committed some transgression. The police officer then brought up a purse-snatching incident, expressing a need to inquire about the matter with my father. The mention of such an incident left me puzzled, and I began to wonder about the unfolding events that seemed to add further layers of complexity to my already tumultuous life. Indeed, the enigmatic cloud of suspicion had descended upon my father, casting a shadow over our tranquil abode. The air thick with uncertainty, I found myself face to face with a stern-faced police officer bearing the weight of an accusation that seemed inconceivable. Inquiring about my father's whereabouts, the officer, with an air of professionalism, sought confirmation of his presence within our home. The exchange took an unexpected turn as the officer, grappling with the perplexity in my tone, requested to lay eyes upon my father. Navigating the corridors of my dwelling, I ushered the law enforcement representative into the sacred space of our familial sanctuary, a room adorned with a Buddhist altar and a photograph capturing the essence of my late father's spirit. In the ensuing revelation, I divulged the heartbreaking truth to the officer that my father had met an untimely demise in a tragic traffic accident. The officer, displaying empathy amid the unfolding tragedy, extended condolences for the loss. Yet my quest for justice and clarity persisted, and I sought to discern the source of this bewildering accusation that had stained my father's reputation. However, the officer, bound by the constraints of confidentiality, refrained from divulging the identity of the accuser. Apologies flowed from the lips of the officer as he departed, leaving me grappling with an unsettling sense of confusion and the nagging question of who had leveled such a grave accusation against my departed father. Days unfolded like the pages of a mystery novel, each chapter bringing a new layer of complexity to the narrative as I took on the responsibilities left in the void by my father's absence. Immersed in the daily operations of my father's factory, I witnessed my mother's valiant attempts to fill the void left by his absence. However, the weight of age limited her contributions. Amidst the mechanical symphony of the factory floor, the harmony was shattered by the sudden intrusion of Richard, a character bearing an air of accusation and vengeance. His booming voice reverberated through the cacophony, demanding restitution for a perceived transgression committed by my father. Caught in the crossfire of accusations, I attempted to reason with Richard, asserting my father's innocence in the face of the alleged purse-snatching incident. The atmosphere within the factory shifted, with the ceaseless hum of machinery giving way to hushed whispers and curious glances exchanged among the employees. Richard, however, remained resolute in his pursuit of justice, convinced of my father's guilt. His insistence echoed through the industrial expanse, causing a disturbance that transcended the confines of the factory. Frustration surged within me as I defended my father's honor, challenging Richard's assertions and questioning the veracity of his claims. As the confrontation unfolded, Richard revealed the purported timeline of the incident, fixing it 2 weeks prior. A murmur rippled through the gathered employees, their confusion palpable. My persistent queries regarding the accuracy of the timeline only fueled Richard's frustration, intensifying his vocal protestations. In the midst of the tumult, Richard's disparaging remarks about my father's workplace and colleagues added fuel to the emotional fire. Yet the gravest affront was his attempt to pin the blame for the alleged purse-snatching squarely on my deceased father's shoulders. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow as Richard persisted in his accusations, seemingly oblivious to the irrefutable truth, illuminating the fact that my father, the subject of this tumultuous ordeal, had met his end in a tragic traffic accident a month prior. The realization hung heavy in the air, a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the injustice faced even in death. Richard appeared as though he had ingested an entire pigeonhole, and with an amused expression he muttered, Ha! Undeterred, I pressed on, questioning the incredulous accusation he had just hurled in my father's direction. How could my father snatch purses when he passed away just 1 month ago? Perhaps there wasn't any purse snatching at all, I asserted. However, my skepticism wasn't merely based on the recent events. It was rooted in the knowledge I had gained during our class reunion. It came to light that Richard, since his school days, had been a habitual liar. This revelation occurred during the reunion, where I discovered that his dishonesty had deep roots. Moreover, it turned out that Richard had harbored a long-standing jealousy toward my father, dating back to their school days. This envy sprouted from a romantic rivalry. The girl Richard liked had chosen my father over him. This petty jealousy had fueled an unnecessary rivalry, leaving me unable to forgive Richard for attempting to tarnish my deceased father's reputation with baseless accusations. As Richard persistently asserted his unfounded claims, an interjection from another direction pierced the air. Someone emphatically shouted, "Your president wouldn't do something like that." Our president is a serious person who walks around with honesty, teaching technology, and encouraging independence. He always considers the well-being of the staff and business partners, prioritizing that over profits. The voices praising my father began to multiply, and I felt a mix of emotions, including shame for once thinking my father's work was embarrassing. Amidst the rising tide of support for my father, Richard, trembling and tearful, found himself on the receiving end of an unexpected defense of my father's character by the factory workers. It was a poignant moment that revealed my father's true standing among his peers. In the aftermath, I dealt the decisive blow to Richard by pledging to consult with the police over his false accusations against my father. Overwhelmed and unable to counter the mounting evidence, Richard raised his voice and fled the factory. True to my word, I reported Richard's false accusations to the police, supported by a recording of his statements made by a thoughtful staff member during the heated confrontation. The presence of irrefutable evidence expedited the legal process, leading to Richard's swift apprehension. His attempt to frame my father backfired, transforming his lie into a crime for which he paid a penance in jail. The relief I felt was palpable, knowing that Richard had received the comeuppance he deserved. Days later, Richard's supposed wife sought redemption and arrived at our house with a gift box, apologizing to me and my mother. She confirmed that Richard's actions were a result of the wounds he suffered at the reunion. As it turned out, Richard, once an elite employee, had been fired from his company, struggling to secure new employment. His lies about being an elite crumbled under scrutiny, especially when his inebriated confessions exposed the inconsistencies, ultimately leading to his own embarrassment and downfall. As he grappled with mounting resentment towards my father, an insidious plan began to take root in Richard's mind, a sinister plot to frame him. The sheer audacity of Richard's intention left me utterly disgusted, particularly when I learned of his preposterous rationale for resorting to lies and deceit. Interestingly, it appeared that Richard's wife shared my sentiments. She confided in me, expressing her profound disappointment in Richard's actions and revealing her intention to initiate divorce proceedings. The revelation further underscored the gravity of Richard's transgressions. Adding to the complexity of the situation was the fact that Richard, seemingly devoid of any familial ties, had no children waiting for him upon potential release from jail. This realization cast a somber light on his future prospects. Upon my graduation from college, I found myself at a pivotal juncture. The recent passing of my father weighed heavily on my mind, and I harbored concerns about the state of the company he left behind. Motivated by a dual sense of responsibility and an unshakable desire to honor the legacy of those who had supported my father during Richard's malicious lies, I made the decision to step into the role of leading the company. The decision was multifaceted. Firstly, I felt a genuine concern for the effective management of the company in the wake of my father's demise. Secondly, the impassioned voices of the staff members who had steadfastly defended my father resonated within me. Their loyalty and dedication fueled my determination to become a president who would be both loved and respected by the staff. This incident became a transformative moment for me, Armed with a degree in business administration, I recognized my ability to manage the aspects of the company that my father struggled with. However, I also acknowledged my need to learn from the dedicated staff members who possessed valuable insights into the technological facets of the business. The staff members, driven by a collective sense of loyalty and compassion, willingly imparted their knowledge to me, often emphasizing that their efforts were for the sake of my father. Their anecdotes painted a vivid picture of my father's greatness, and with each story, I grew more appreciative of the man he was. Confronted with the realization of my father's true worth, I found myself expressing remorse for not having recognized his greatness while he was alive. Speaking to his portrait after work, I couldn't help but feel a sense of shame as I looked at my oil-stained self. Yet, I began to view those stains as tangible evidence of my father's tireless work ethic. Determined to honor my father's legacy, I pledged to become a president who mirrored his virtues. I was resolute in my commitment to make his dream of expanding the town factory, a legacy passed down since my grandfather's generation, a reality. Addressing his portrait once again, this time with newfound determination, I spoke of my aspirations and felt an ethereal connection, as if my father were smiling down upon me. From that moment forward, I dedicated myself to working tirelessly, aspiring to become a president worthy of my father's legacy and realizing his dream of expanding the family's factory that had endured through generations.
I thought Mom had lots of money saved, but turns out she didn't. I told you, right? I think we should make her leave. Why keep someone who doesn't have a job here? I've been living here for 3 months, and my son and his wife used up all my money. They treated me like I was just here to clean up after them. I got tired of it all, so I left quietly. Then my son called me, sounding really worried. "Mom, what's happening?" Tommy asked urgently on the phone. Right around that time, something I did became big news all over the United States. My name is Sarah, and I'm 70 years old. I lived in France for a while, but then I got sick and had to come back to the United States. My old apartment was gone, so I asked my son Tommy and his wife if I could stay with them for a bit. Tommy is my only son, and he's 44 years old, working in an office. He and his wife Alice don't have any kids, and they seem to live quietly. We lost touch while I was away, but I decided to reconnect, and Tommy seemed happy to hear from me. I explained my situation and asked if I could stay for a bit. Tommy reluctantly said yes. It felt awkward to ask, but the joy of being with my family again made me brave. Feeling a bit nervous but mostly happy, I took a taxi from the airport to their house. When I got there, Tony and Alice greeted me at the door. Tommy seemed glad to see me, but Alice didn't look happy at all. "I'm planning to stay here for a few months. My stuff will arrive later," I told them. I left my small bag and went to the living room. We talked about our lives, jobs, and my time in France. When Tommy asked why I moved to France, I just said, "I'm getting old and wanted to enjoy living in the countryside there." Tommy chuckled, but Alice still seemed unhappy. Then we talked about my health issues. I've been feeling really dizzy, and the doctors think it might be Meniere's disease. When it happens, everything seems to spin around me and I feel sick. I don't feel safe living alone, so I wanted to stay with them until I feel better. After our chat, I went back to the entrance to grab my things from my bag. As I was sorting out my stuff in the hallway, I heard Tony and Alice talking. "Tommy, are you really okay with Mom staying here?" "I don't want to live with an old lady," Alice said. "She's my mom, come on. Plus, you work part-time, so it's not like you'll always be here," Tony replied. "Yeah, but what about her days off? How long is she going to stay?" "I want her gone," Alice insisted. "Don't say that. Mom will leave eventually. Let's talk about money tomorrow. Just keep your voice down. She might hear you," Tony warned. "She can't hear us. She's old. They say old age brings sharp ears for insults," Alice remarked. And there I was, listening to their talk in the chilly hallway. I feel bad for suddenly intruding on Tony and Alice's lives. I'm sure it's a big hassle for them. But I'm really happy to be spending time with them after all these years apart. When Tommy was young, I raised him alone after my husband passed away. We didn't have much, and Tony faced his own struggles with sickness and all. This doesn't make up for that, but I wanted to come here to share my apologies and gratitude. That's why I came to this house. It's a shame I'm not welcomed, but they have their own lives to lead. I went to the guest room they gave me, trying to calm my anxious heart. The next morning, Tony left for work, leaving just Alice and me. While I was doing some crafting in the living room, Alice came up to me. "Hey Sarah, can you not make such a mess?" I glanced around and saw fabric bits and threads everywhere. "Oh sorry, I'll tidy up. Do you know what this is?" I showed her the little pouch I was sewing with a cute turtle design. "This is a turtle pouch. I love turtles, so I make crafts with them. It even has a zipper on its shell," I explained. "That's nice, but Sarah, you can't just hang around here all day." Alice interrupted, clearly uninterested. "At least go somewhere else when I'm not working. You're getting in the way." "But I get dizzy if I go out too much," I said. "I'll drag you to the community center nearby. You can stay there during the day. I have things to do at home," Alice said firmly, without room for discussion. "And also help with the chores while you're here. You're not just here to relax. It's the least you can do since we're letting you stay," she added, leaving me surprised. So I finally said, "Okay," and got up slowly. From then on, I found myself doing all the housework, even though I felt dizzy and achy. I took on the chores that Alice and Tommy seemed to expect me to do, almost like I was their housekeeper. I noticed that Alice was always glued to her phone, maybe neglecting the housework before I arrived. That evening, when Tommy came home, he approached me with a smile and asked, "Mom, did you bring your bank card?" I looked at him over my reading glasses, nodded, and got up. I took out my bank card from the little pouch I made and handed it to Tommy. He quickly checked it, and his expression changed. "Wait, Mom, is this all the money you have saved? Do you have any other accounts?" he asked, his face tightening. "That's all I have. I don't need much at my age, and I don't have any health problems," I said, smiling. But as the conversation went on, Tommy's expression grew darker. "Wow, this isn't much money at all, not even $10,000. You said you were living well abroad, so I assumed." Tommy kept questioning me, asking if I had more money hidden away. When I said no, he sighed and seemed disappointed. "Fine, I'll keep hold of this card for now. I'm doing you a favor by letting you stay here, so this is the least you can do." After Tony got my account details, he took my bank and debit cards and left the room. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear Tony sighing loudly through the wall that separated our rooms. Oh, what a disappointment. I thought Mom had a lot of money, but it turns out our finances are in bad shape because of her. I shouldn't have agreed to let her stay. We should kick her out. She's not bringing us any benefits, Tony complained. It seemed like both of them were pretty sure of themselves. They talked openly in the next room, almost as if they wanted me to hear. In my cold bed, I held back tears of loneliness and sadness. The next day, since Alice had the day off, she drove me to the local community center. I opened my bag to continue my crafting in the lounge area, but realized I had forgotten the fabric I needed at home. I hesitated but couldn't bring myself to ask Alice to go back and get it. Luckily, I wasn't feeling too dizzy that day. I knew the area, so I decided to take a walk back home to get the fabric. When I finally reached home, I peeked through the window and saw Alice with a man I didn't recognize. At first, I thought he might be a guest, but they seemed really close. I hesitated outside for a moment, then decided not to go in. It dawned on me that maybe they wanted me out so I wouldn't interrupt their affair. Back at the community center, I couldn't stop thinking about Alice and the man. I decided to call someone for advice. From then on, I avoided mentioning the situation and continued interacting with Tony and his wife. But whenever I left the house, I made sure to leave a red turtle pouch on the living room side table, just to let them know I was aware of what was going on. 3 months went by like this. I had been staying with Tony's family for a while now, essentially becoming their household maid. Whenever I was at home, I had to do endless chores. And when Alice was around, I was sent off to the community center. Most of my savings had been drained by Tommy, who had a gambling addiction and spent a lot of his time on lotteries and slot machines. His obsession with money seemed to stem from the financial struggles he faced as a child. I tried to talk to him about it at first, but it always made him angry. After 3 months of this, I couldn't take it anymore. One night before a long weekend, I decided to do something I had been thinking about. Tell me, Alice, I want to thank you for letting me stay with you. Tell me, I know things were tough for you when you were young because we didn't have much money. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused, but I'm grateful. I took out a homemade turtle pouch from the table. It was green with a zipper on the shell. This is a token of my appreciation for both of you. I hope you'll accept it. To my surprise, neither Tony nor Alice showed any interest in my handmade gift. Mom, that's enough. Are we really out of money? Can't you think of some French account or something? Tony said. I've told you, we're out of money. Look, I put a lot of effort into making this. Can't you just accept it as a symbol of my love? Remember how happy you used to be when I would fill the shell with candy and a little pocket money? Tommy started getting more and more irritated. I'm not a kid anymore. I don't want something like this. Sarah, how much longer do you plan on depending on us? It's getting annoying, Tommy continued. Both Tony and his wife gave me a cold look. Desperate. I tried to remind Tommy. Do you remember Joe? He helped us out in our old apartment. What? I don't remember. Stop bringing up old stories. Are we done? Shocked into silence, I held onto the turtle pouch tightly, feeling the texture of the paper inside. The next day, Tony and his wife went on vacation, leaving me behind. After our conversation the night before, I had decided it was time for me to leave as well. So I quickly packed my bag with the help of a arranged carrier and sent it off to my home in France. I made sure to include the red turtle pouch in my carry-on bag. Before leaving, I left a simple note on the table thanking them and saying goodbye, and then I left the house where I had been staying for 3 months. Instead of going straight home to France, I stayed in a hotel in the US for a while. I had things to take care of, and I figured Tony and his wife would contact me eventually. Sure enough, about 2 weeks later, Tony called me. Mom, what's going on? That turtle pouch, it's yours, right? I could hear Tony's frustration over the phone. Ah, you noticed. I wasn't surprised when I saw the news on TV. Inside the turtle-shaped pouch that I had planned to give to Tommy and his wife was a check for $1 million. It was my way of thanking them for all they had done for me and apologizing for any trouble I may have caused them in the past. Some people might think it's shallow to make amends with money, but I had been dreaming of the day when I could give it to them, saving up bit by bit over the course of 40 years. Before meeting Tony after a long time, I did some investigating and discovered that he was in debt. He had tried to pay off his gambling debts by gambling even more, only to find himself in even deeper trouble. Despite having a steady job, he was struggling. All I wanted was for him to clear his debts and leave peacefully, but when I offered to help, they refused to accept my gesture. It seemed like they had completely forgotten about the kindness they had shown to my family and me in the past. So I decided to divide the $1 million check into smaller sums and donate them to charities and welfare organizations across America. I put the donations in the same handmade turtle pouch and sent them anonymously. The turtle pouch became a sensation, making headlines and trending on social media. On social media, Alice's son commented, "Hey mom, isn't that the turtle pouch?" "Yeah, mate. So does that mean you were going to give us one filled with money too?" "Yes, exactly. That was my way of saying thank you and I'm sorry. I've been making both the pouch and saving the money to give to you." "Well, you could have told us. We would have accepted it. If you didn't want my feelings, then you don't need my money either." Tony's voice was filled with rage as he yelled on the phone, completely losing control. "That money belongs to me. How dare you trick me? Give it back." I couldn't bear to listen any longer, so I pulled the phone away from my ear. After a moment, I spoke up. "Okay, let's calm down. You're giving me a headache. There's one more turtle pouch left, and if you really want it, it's yours." After some time, Tony finally calmed down and repeated his request for the turtle pouch. We agreed to meet later at a cafe. On the appointed day, I brought the last red turtle pouch in an envelope to our meeting spot. Tony and his wife were already there and immediately demanded the money before I even had a chance to sit down. As I quietly took up the red turtle pouch, Tony grabbed it immediately and unzipped its shell. But inside wasn't a check, it was a small electronic device. "What's this?" Tony asked, puzzled as he examined the device. He found a button and pressed it, and a voice recording started playing. Alice, who was standing next to Tony, went pale as she heard her own voice talking affectionately with another man, someone who clearly wasn't Tommy. Confused and shocked, Alice tried to snatch the recording from Tommy's hand, but he held onto it tightly. As they struggled, I opened the envelope I had brought and laid out several photos on the table. Pictures of Alice having an affair with another man in their home. Confronted with undeniable evidence, Alice became flustered and kept asking why. Tommy picked up each photo, studying them carefully. Ever since I came to your house, something didn't feel right. A friend suggested I hire someone to investigate, and they even offered to cover the costs. What's wrong with you? Why would you do this? Alice demanded. You're my son's wife. It's heartbreaking to think that family would deceive each other. You'll understand when you're older. I suppose fate brought me here to uncover your infidelity. Have you been lying to me all this time? Since when, Tommy? Tommy remained silent, and now it was Alice's turn to speak. And what about you wasting all our money on gambling? I only spend what I earn, and you have your part-time jobs, so you should have some money saved up too. Listening to their argument, it became clear that this couple had been keeping their financial struggles hidden until now. Neither of them had any money left. Alice, you were $40,000 in debt. You've been giving all your earnings to your affair partner. I had the investigator check your finances. Both Tony and Alice were shocked, and they started shouting at each other. I was stunned when I heard the results of the investigation. This couple was on the verge of bankruptcy. Look, if we get Mom's money, we can pay back the debt. So give it to us now. I donated all the money. The only thing left is this red turtle figurine. He wasted my savings on gambling. What? You're kidding me. All of it. In a fit of anger, Tony lunged at me across the table. Other customers started to pay attention, and the staff rushed over. The $1 million is mine. It was supposed to be mine. Give it back. Tony's rage escalated to the point where the police had to be called to restrain him. After some intervention from the officers, they kindly escorted me back to my hotel due to concerns about Tony's aggressive behavior. A week later, Tony and Alice's relationship had completely broken down due to the affair and financial troubles. They ended up getting divorced. Tony, now single, became even more engrossed in gambling, accumulating more debt. He was caught attempting to embezzle company funds, which led to him being fired. His outburst at the cafe was captured on video and spread on social media, making it hard for him to find another job. Unable to bear the shame, Tony cut off all contact and disappeared. After the divorce, Alice had nobody to turn to and moved into a rundown public housing unit, living alone. Just as I was about to make a donation for turtle rescue, an online post I made joking about my own turtle went viral. Alice began facing harassment and stalking, which eventually affected her part-time job and resulted in her being fired. Even the man she was having an affair with grew tired of her and left. Now, with no source of income, she relies on temporary assistance for needy families to survive. After returning to my home in France and finishing unpacking in my apartment, I changed into a dress with ease. As I reviewed some work documents, I heard a noise at the entrance. It seemed Joe, my roommate, had returned home. Hey, Madam President, welcome back. How was your trip to America? Joe greeted me with a smile as he set down his coat and bags. Joe is 75 years old and was a resident in the same apartment complex where my son Tommy and I lived years ago. During that difficult time, I was struggling with poverty after losing my husband and caring for a young Tommy who had asthma. We had no utilities, and with no one to turn to, I felt desperate and considered giving up. It was Joe and his wife, our upstairs neighbors, who saved us. They became our lifelines. Please call me Sarah. I'm back, and look, I brought back many souvenirs. Wow, all my favorites. Thanks, I'll take some to the storytelling event at the community center tomorrow. Joe examined each of the souvenirs piled up on the table, his face glowing with happiness. After we had gotten back on our feet, Joe and his wife moved away for work. Years later, we ran into each other in the city, and I started helping with a support program for the needy that Joe had founded. By then, Joe's wife had passed away, and we became business and life partners. I've been leading the organization since Joe retired a few years ago. What began as a small initiative between Joe and myself has blossomed into a large-scale international organization over the past 30 years. Currently, our main focus is on supporting single mothers and their children. A few years back, we relocated to France to study their advanced support systems. Although we've gained recognition in France, we're still relatively unknown in America. I'm planning to expand our activities there soon and wanted to spend some quality time with Tony and his family before they found out about my work. In the end, I couldn't make them understand how I felt, but that's their decision to make. Even if it was only for a brief moment, I was grateful to have had the opportunity to spend time together as a family. Now at the age of 70, I refuse to let my age define me. There's still so much I want and need to accomplish. As I straightened my back in my dress, I began to ponder the content of my upcoming international speech for tomorrow.
So, you already have the divorce papers ready? Are you trying to scare me? You know I'm ready for this at any time. You better calm down and think about what you just said. With that, my husband Jackson got up and went into his room. My name is Kama, and I'm a 28-year-old office worker. I got married a year ago to a man named Jackson. We met on a blind date, and after dating for a year and a half, he proposed to me. Although I thought we got married a bit too soon, I'd always wanted to be married and have children before turning 30, so I accepted his proposal. However, I later realized I should have been more cautious. The first surprise came when Jackson changed his job as soon as we got married. Out of the blue, he said he was changing jobs. Why all of a sudden? I asked him. He replied, "Because I can't show my full potential there." I was taken aback, especially when he told me he had already submitted his resignation and would leave at the end of the month. He managed to get a new job, but the salary was lower than his previous one. I thought it was fine since I was also working, but then Jackson started asking me to quit my job. I would have been okay with quitting if his income could support us both. However, as I mentioned, he had just changed jobs and his salary was now lower. Jackson insisted that his salary would increase soon, but we had no idea when that would be. If I quit my job now, we wouldn't be able to save any money and would struggle to cover expenses like rent and car payments. In short, we couldn't manage on Jackson's salary alone. I told Jackson, "I won't quit my job until your salary goes up." Jackson seemed to agree, but he kept asking me to quit. Every time I gave him the same answer. Now we've been married for a year and Jackson's salary still hasn't increased. He keeps asking, "When are you going to quit?" I'm tempted to sarcastically say, "Now," and then tell him I'm just kidding because I can't quit yet. If he wants me to quit so badly, he should earn more money. I feel like he should focus on his work instead of persistently asking me to quit. I wondered why Jackson wants me to quit my job so badly, and I finally figured it out. It seems Jackson wants me to take care of his mother, Helen. Whenever we visited my in-laws' house, Jackson would say to Helen, "I just want to make things easier for you, Mom." Helen would graciously thank him, and then Jackson would add, "But we're both working," giving me a meaningful look. It was as if he was subtly pushing me to quit my job. Jackson claims his mother needs assistance, but Helen isn't sick or in need of care. She's healthy and quite active. In fact, she earns enough from her part-time job to support her hobbies, social outings, and live a fulfilling life. Realistically, she doesn't require my help at all. If I were in Helen's shoes, I'd feel disheartened to be seen as needing care when I'm perfectly capable. But Jackson continues to insist that I take care of Helen. "Oh, if only one of us were home during the day, we could go check on Mom every day," Jackson suddenly voiced his thoughts. It seemed he wanted me to visit my in-laws' house daily, and hearing this was exhausting. I persisted in questioning my husband. "Helen is perfectly healthy, so what exactly do you expect me to do?" Jackson responded matter-of-factly, "There are plenty of things you could do. You could help with housework or run errands. There's a lot to assist her with." "But Helen works part-time and spends time with her friends during the day, so she's not home much, right?" I countered. "Even if Mom isn't home, you could still handle the housework, couldn't you?" Jackson's words left me baffled. What is he saying? Am I supposed to be her maid? I thought to myself. Jackson seems to be very concerned about appearances, especially in front of his parents. If he's so determined to care for them, he should handle the household chores himself. I wasn't interested in indulging Jackson's pride, so I didn't quit my job and avoided visiting my in-laws on my days off. However, I did make sure to visit them during holidays like New Year's. Thinking back, Jackson often assigned me tasks whenever we visited my in-laws together. He'd ask me to clean up, assist his mom, check if anything was needed from the store, and so on. But I never acted on these requests. When he asked me to go to the store, I'd respond with, "Don't you know more about this area than I do?" He'd then say, "It wouldn't make sense if I did it." I didn't really understand his reasoning. It seemed like he just wanted to control me and feel good about taking care of his parents, didn't it? Over time, that's how I started to view Jackson. Could it be that he's more concerned with appearances than genuinely caring for me? When I boldly asked him, "Why didn't you pitch in or quit your job to care for your own mother?" he appeared extremely uncomfortable and had a disgusted expression on his face. "That's not something I'm supposed to do. I'm giving you these instructions so that my mom will think that you are a considerate, useful wife. I hope you realize how kind I am to you," he said. In other words, he wants to dump all the difficult tasks on his wife and show off how good he is as if it's something remarkable. Well, I'm not his servant or slave, and I don't deserve to be treated disrespectfully in front of my in-laws. If Jackson continues making unreasonable demands, I won't stay silent. I'll stand up for myself. But despite talking to him, Jackson hasn't changed. He still asks, "Are you going to quit your job?" And whenever we visit my in-laws, he orders me around just like before. I had enough and decided it was time to discuss it with him seriously. "I think we need to talk about our future," I said. "What are you even trying to say?" Jackson replied, sounding annoyed. "I'm honestly fed up. I'm tired of you constantly asking me when I'll quit my job and exhausted from you pressuring me to take care of Helen," I explained. "Why are you fed up with that? You're my wife and it's your duty to care for your husband's parents," Jackson said. "Don't you think that's a huge responsibility for me? Shouldn't you, as their biological child, be responsible for helping with the housework and taking care of your own parents in the first place?" I asked. "No way, it's the wife's duty to do it. Are you the kind of person who doesn't care about family?" "I'm really disappointed to hear you say that," Jackson responded. "Then let me ask you this, how have you been taking care of my parents?" "If I asked you to care for my parents, would you do it then?" I questioned. Jackson stared at me blankly. "What are you saying? Why should a husband take care of his wife's parents? So does that mean you won't take care of my parents now or ever?" I pressed. "The husband's parents and wife's parents are completely different," Jackson replied. "What difference does that make, anyway? I don't get it," I said, feeling frustrated. "I didn't realize you were so clueless. It's like talking to my old boss," I continued. "What are you saying?" Jackson asked, confused. "I'm saying the husband's parents should come first. You should take care of your wife's parents," I clarified. "What?" I exclaimed. "So you only prioritize your own blood-related family? I'm so disappointed in you. I won't be visiting your parents anymore." "Ha, why would you do that? Enough is enough. I'm the one who wants you to stop this nonsense," I retorted. "No way, how dare you talk back like that? My mom is right," Jackson shot back. "Ha, Mom was talking about you. She said you're a badly behaved wife. That's why she gave me this." With that, Jackson pulled out a piece of paper from his bag. It was divorce papers. "What? You already had divorce papers ready?" I was shocked, but Jackson seemed strangely proud. "See? I scared you, didn't I? I'm prepared for this anytime, so think about what you just said," Jackson declared smugly before leaving for his room. Unbelievable. Why is Jackson so selfish? That look of triumph on his face. It's clear the divorce papers are a threat to make me obey him. The fact that Helen was involved made me even more suspicious. Jackson is acting like a puppet for his mom, trying to control me while following her orders. It's ridiculous. I won't let Jackson have his way. How can he not see our marriage is in trouble when he acts like this? His lack of understanding just annoys me more. Jackson had already completed the divorce papers and handed them to me with witnesses, including Helen and his friends. This meant I could sign and file them whenever I chose. The next day, after Jackson went to work, I filled out the divorce papers and submitted them to the city office. As a precaution, I also filed a notice of non-acceptance of the marriage certificate. I called my parents and explained the situation, knowing Jackson might threaten to file a marriage certificate on his own if he found out. My parents were shocked that I had already prepared the divorce papers but fully supported my decision. Outraged by Jackson's behavior, they offered to help me move my belongings immediately. Taking a leave from work, I had my parents come over and relocate all my things to their house while Jackson was away. I decided to stay with my parents for a while. It was the first time in a long time that I felt truly comfortable and at ease in their home. Reflecting back, Jackson never did his share of housework. I was the one cooking dinner after long work days and handling all the cleaning and laundry on my days off. On top of that, he expected me to care for his parents, which was impossible. That night, Jackson called me, probably just back from work. "Hello? Hey, where are you right now?" "I'm at my parents' house." "Oh, why would you go back there without my permission? And where's all your stuff? Don't tell me you're staying the night." I almost laughed. How could he think I was staying when I had taken most of my belongings with me? It showed his selfishness to even suggest that I move out of the house. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "What are you talking about? Come back here and make me some food." "Make it yourself," I replied, ending the call. I couldn't discuss divorce with him if he continued to behave this way. I decided to wait for him to come to my parents' house and blocked his number. A week later, Jackson showed up at my parents' house, accompanied by his parents. They all wore serious expressions. I led them into the living room, and we faced each other, 3 against 3. "How could you do this? How could you leave without my permission?" Jackson demanded. "Well, you were treating me like a housekeeper. All I asked you to do was take care of your family," I countered. "That's not true. What kind of wife are you if you don't take care of Jackson?" Helen shot me a fierce glare. My father began to tremble with anger, but I interjected. "Jackson told me to quit my job and care for Helen, saying it was my duty as his wife. Yet, when it comes to my family, he expects me to handle everything alone. Ultimately, Jackson wants obedience and uses me to care for his parents while taking credit for it. That's why he prioritizes his parents over mine. Have you heard Jackson say these things?" Helen continued to glare, but Carter looked confused, indicating he hadn't heard this before. "Let's clear the air," Jackson said suddenly, bringing up the divorce papers and claiming it was Helen's idea. "Why would you suggest that?" Carter asked, clearly surprised. "Oh no, it's because Camilla has an attitude problem," Helen stammered. "And did you really say that Camilla's parents aren't a priority?" I pressed. "Well, it's only natural that your own parents come first," Helen retorted defensively. "Don't be absurd. I came here to support you after hearing about the unfair treatment Camilla endured, but now it seems you're the one at fault." "Don't hide behind your parents' authority to get your way," Carter said, making Jackson visibly shrink in his seat. Carter then apologized to me and my parents. "I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by my foolish son. I will have a serious talk with him." "Carter, you're not to blame at all, so please don't apologize," I replied. "Thank you for your kind words, but there's something else I need to say." Turning to Jackson, who was now nervous, I said, "The divorce papers you gave me, I've already filed them. We're no longer married." Jackson and Helen both turned pale. "Why did you file them without my permission?" Jackson demanded, shocked. "You told me I could file them whenever I wanted. Besides, you had already filled out your part and had Helen sign as a witness," I calmly explained. "Oh, that was," Jackson stammered, clearly at a loss for words. Carter, furious, intervened. "Jackson, you used divorce as a threat." He slapped Jackson across the face. Helen was visibly shaken by the confrontation. "I apologize deeply that you had to witness this. You're right to divorce this fool." "On behalf of Jackson, I'm truly sorry for ruining your marriage," Carter said, grasping Jackson by the collar and demanding apologies from both Jackson and Helen before escorting them out of the house. Later, I thanked Carter for his intervention. He ensured that all of Jackson's assets and property were transferred to me without any hassle. Despite my higher income and managing our household, it was a relief to secure everything from our marriage. I later learned that Carter had divorced Helen, clearly disgusted with her actions. The other day, I ran into a colleague from Jackson's old workplace who shared some surprising news. Jackson wasn't performing well at his job and often received harsh criticism from his boss. In defiance, Jackson resigned and changed jobs. This only added to my frustration with him. Instead of taking responsibility for his shortcomings, he blamed others, which likely contributed to his lower pay at the new job. I'm relieved to have left him. I've rented a cozy apartment and enjoy living independently. Work is going smoothly, and I even received a recent raise. Right now, I'm not interested in relationships and prefer focusing on my career. Jackson always cared more about appearances than actual abilities. He maintained a facade at home but failed to improve professionally. Sadly, many husbands use divorce threats as leverage, thinking they're powerful, but it's a big mistake. I hope they realize their folly and find happiness alone. Meanwhile, I'm grateful to have moved on from Jackson and look forward to meeting someone special in the future.
My brother invited us to stay at his place and said we wouldn't have to pay rent or bills. I work with money and my husband Charlie fixes cars. We live in the house where I grew up. But it's not just any house. It's been in my family for a long time and used to be where my dad ran his business. My brother was supposed to take over the business, so he studied economics in college. He even went to Oxford University to learn more about running a business. After that, he came back to the US and worked with our dad for a while. When our parents retired and moved away, they gave the business to my brother and the house to me. So my husband and I decided to live there. The house is in a great spot, close to public transportation and other important places like shops, hospitals, and schools. It's perfect for us now, and even when our kids grow up and move out, we'll still be comfortable here. I'm really thankful my parents gave me this house. We were excited about our future here, but things took a bad turn unexpectedly. My mother-in-law started visiting a lot after we moved in. She kept asking about my parents' money because they used to run a business. She'd say things like, "Hey Maya, how much money do your parents have? What will you get when they pass away?" It made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to be rude, so I just said, "I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it much. They gave us this house, so maybe there won't be much money left." I tried to brush it off, but she kept pushing, saying, "That can't be true. They're getting old. They must have talked to you about their money." It seemed like she was really interested in their wealth, like she was expecting to get something. I already knew what I would inherit, but I decided not to tell her or my husband, who's close to her, to avoid any more trouble. Something really unexpected happened next. Out of nowhere, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family moved into our house. It was a holiday morning around 8:00 a.m. when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find movers standing there. I was shocked and confused. Then my mother-in-law and brother-in-law's family showed up and said, "We're moving in here today, so take care of us." When I saw their smirking faces, I felt a shiver down my spine. My husband woke up, and when I asked him what was going on, he seemed unfazed and said, "What's the problem? There's plenty of space in this house for all of us." He acted like it was totally normal for them to move in. As if that wasn't surprising enough, my sister-in-law said something even more unbelievable. She said, "We were invited by your brother, Maya. He said we don't have to pay rent or bills, so we're counting on you." Then my brother-in-law started barging into rooms without asking and said, "This room gets good sunlight, so we'll take it, Charlie. Move all the stuff out into the hallway." I felt really dizzy after all this happened. This is my house, but they're acting like they own it, opening doors and claiming rooms. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family have been pretty rude for a while, especially my sister-in-law, who even went through my bag without asking. If they keep this up, they'll start taking over my space. I've had enough. This is my house, so why are you acting like you own it? I've had it. I want everyone to leave. I usually keep my cool and don't raise my voice, but seeing these people move into the house my parents gave me without asking and acting like it's theirs pushed me over the edge. That's why I lost control and yelled at all three of them. But then something unexpected happened. "How dare you talk to us like that? You're the one who should leave." The moment those words were said, I felt a sharp pain on my cheek. Did I just get slapped? It took me a few seconds to realize what had happened. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it, and all I could feel was the throbbing pain on my cheek. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I can't live with people who would do something like that, but this house belongs to me. I don't want them living here like parasites, so I decided to pack my things and leave, planning to tell my family about what happened. I needed to find a place far away from here, so I rented a monthly apartment for now. I'll have to commute to work from there. As soon as I told my parents about what happened over the phone, I could sense their anger, even from a distance, especially from my dad. He's always been very caring and has adored me and my brother. As a CEO, he was strict, but as a father, he was always kind and ready to help us out of any trouble. I didn't want to drag my parents, who were just about to retire, into this mess, but I had no choice because my rightful home was being taken away from me. While I stayed in the monthly apartment, I was sure that my husband and his family were making themselves comfortable in my house. So I decided to take action based on suggestions from my brother and father. A few days later, during my break, I checked my phone and saw dozens of missed calls and messages from my husband. I knew exactly why he was trying to reach me. I took action and called the water and electric companies to shut off the utilities. Our house relies completely on electricity, and without it, nothing works. We haven't set up solar panels yet, so there's no other way to get power. Since it's really hot right now, living without electricity and water must be tough. My husband's calls were probably about dealing with this situation. Just as I was about to ignore his call, my husband rang again, perfectly timed with my break. "Hey, what's going on? There's no power, and the water isn't running. Did you cut off the electricity and water?" I could tell from his voice that he was in a panic. The house belongs to me, so now that I'm not living there, it wouldn't make sense to keep the electricity and water running, right? That's why I had them shut off. If I kept the utilities on, I'd have to pay the bills even though I'm not living there. I can't agree to that, so I naturally had them turned off. When I explained this to my husband, he got really angry and insisted that I turn the services back on right away. But just because he wants me to doesn't mean I'm going to agree. I get it. If they want to renew the services, they should pay for it themselves. But whenever this comes up, they always say things like, "It's your house, so you should foot the bill." Their words and actions don't match. Anyway, I have no plans to renew the contract or tell them to leave the house immediately. I simply hung up the phone after saying that as my break was ending. Later on, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law all called me saying the same thing. They wanted me to reconnect the electricity and water because their room was too hot and uncomfortable, and it was inconvenient without water. But these were their problems, not mine. After listening to their complaints, I told them to deal with it themselves and hung up. I thought they were just being greedy and hoped they'd give up and leave soon. Even after a week went by, there was no sign of them leaving. So I decided to take stronger action. I talked to a lawyer from my father's company about the situation and asked him to send a notice to my husband. The notice was about trespassing. They had entered my house without permission, forced me out, and were using it as if it were their own. I warned them that I was considering taking legal action against them for this. Why did I receive this document from a lawyer? Did things really have to escalate this far? My husband, who seemed surprised and panicked by my actions, came to me seeking a resolution. Knowing how much they care about their reputation, the thought of being sued would be really stressful for them. They definitely don't want to deal with a lawyer, but they also don't want to give up their current lifestyle. So they're likely trying to find a way to convince me to let them stay. I can see through my husband's intentions very clearly, but I couldn't bring myself to listen to their pleas, so I didn't give in to my husband's requests. My husband finally exploded in anger, forgetting he was at work, and yelled at me, "Stop it. Just because we're being a bit sneaky doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. Go back to how things were and drop the lawyer." Despite his loud outburst, I remained unaffected. Instead, I felt annoyed by his call, thinking, who does he think he is, taking over someone else's house? No matter how much he shouts, my stance won't change. If they continue squatting there, I'll take legal action. They better think twice before acting. Even as my husband continued yelling over the phone, I ignored him and hung up. It felt like a waste of time. I had already discussed divorce with my lawyer. When I got home, I saw missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but I knew they'd only try to settle things. I didn't want to waste any more time, so I blocked their numbers to avoid further calls. After the threat of legal action, my husband's prideful family couldn't bear the thought of being sued. They packed their bags and left the house. With the lawyer's help, the divorce negotiations went smoothly. I arranged for a cleaning service to come in, and finally, I returned to my sparkling clean house. While living separately from my husband's family and then in a monthly rental was comfortable, nothing beats being back in my own home. However, I noticed that the house needed some renovations in certain areas. I discussed this with my father, who introduced me to a reliable contractor. I began planning the renovations with their help. Living alone is really comfortable. I enjoy the freedom of not being tied down by anyone else. I found myself enjoying the freedom of my current life. I could lounge on the sofa without anyone scolding me, eat whatever I wanted without judgment. But then, I received a call from an unknown number after 3 months of silence. Initially, I ignored it, thinking it might be a contractor. However, when the calls persisted, I reluctantly answered, only to find it was from my ex-husband, from whom I had recently divorced with the help of a lawyer. We had made a pact to never contact each other again. So why was he calling now, especially after changing his number? We had agreed through our lawyers to stay apart for good. There was nothing left to discuss, so I asked him not to contact me again. Just as I was about to hang up, he pleaded, "Please just listen to me for a moment. I'm begging you." Despite my reluctance, he began speaking without my consent. It turned out his company was facing a severe financial crisis and they had decided to reduce his salary. Moreover, my mother-in-law's health was failing, rendering her unable to work. My sister-in-law and her husband couldn't contribute much to the household expenses due to his unstable job situation. Although my sister-in-law was working multiple part-time jobs, most of her earnings were going towards paying off her husband's debts. My ex-husband was struggling to make ends meet, and with his salary cut, things were only going to get tougher. After hearing all of that, all I could think was, okay, so what? They barged into my house without permission, did whatever they wanted, and even tried to kick me out. It's simply unbelievable. I feel nothing for people who would do such a thing, and I have no sympathy for them. Even if you tell me about their troubles, it doesn't change anything. They're your family, you should deal with it yourself. There's nothing I can do about it. My ex-husband started to panic even more at my words. Don't say that. We're in serious trouble. We won't even be able to pay the rent for our apartment and will struggle to buy food tomorrow. We used to be a family, right? Please help us, he pleaded, almost in tears. But I wasn't convinced. When I was in trouble, he did nothing to help, and he, along with my mother-in-law, looked down on me. Just like her, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law always belittled me. They insulted me for my appearance or my old-fashioned views. They didn't care how much it hurt me. My mother-in-law not only made things worse, but she also pressured me to have a baby as soon as possible. She forced strange herbal medicines on me, booked unnecessary doctor's appointments, and spread rumors to the neighbors that I was unable to conceive. Looking back, there wasn't a single positive aspect to my marriage. My ex-husband, who used to be kind before we got married, became a puppet under my mother-in-law's control after the wedding. On the first day my mother-in-law barged into our house, I was out for an appointment. She cried to my husband, saying she wanted to be friends with me, but the moment we met, she would badmouth me. She'd say things like, "My son seems to have lost weight. Is it because your cooking is so bad?" Whether we were at home or out, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law would join in, laughing at me. I can't deal with people who behave like this anymore. No matter what you say, my feelings won't change. I can't help you guys, so I'm going to hang up now. And please never contact me again. With that, I finally hung up the phone and blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband, he might change his number and try to contact me again. So I decided to change my phone number at the store over the weekend. But before that, those four broke the promise made through the lawyer and suddenly showed up at my house at 11:00 p.m. Open up, let us in, and take care of us. We're family, you should help us. They were banging on the door, yelling loudly without considering the late hour. What's going on at this time? Please go back home, you're disturbing the neighbors. When I went to open the door, they seemed ready to force their way in. So I tried talking to them through the intercom, but they didn't care. They continued banging on the door and causing a commotion. I couldn't believe I was dealing with people behaving so recklessly. I felt overwhelmed and considered calling the police when I heard sirens approaching from outside. It seemed a neighbor had taken the initiative as soon as they heard the police sirens. The group, startled, thought I had called the police and attempted to flee. However, with a crowd gathered, escape wasn't an option. Consequently, they were escorted to the police station by the responding officers. I was questioned about the incident and I explained everything that had transpired. News of my ex-husband and his companion's actions spread rapidly in the neighborhood. Among the crowd was a co-worker of my ex-husband's, and by the next day, the entire office was aware of the situation. Already struggling due to a salary reduction, getting the police involved sealed my ex-husband's fate with his employer. He was fired, unable to afford his apartment rent anymore. Financial strain created tension between him and his sister's family, leading to their shared living arrangement coming to an end. Now, Charlie resides in public housing with his mother, working multiple part-time jobs to get by. Even his mother has taken on part-time work, eager to contribute financially.
Your son has a warrant out for his arrest. Hearing those words, my mind went completely blank. What? Why, my son is being arrested? What does this even mean? Questions began swirling in my head, one after another, but none stayed long enough to grasp. I stood frozen in the doorway, speechless, my mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The police officer stepped forward, clearly intending to prevent me from shutting the door. Overwhelmed by the presence of the three large men, I instinctively tried to close the door quickly, anxiety surging through me. Your son is here, isn't he? May we come in and talk for a bit? One of the officers asked. Just a moment, please, I stammered, desperately trying to stop them from entering. I braced against the officer's chest, using every ounce of strength in my legs to hold my ground. I'm sorry, I really don't understand what's happening. Could you please explain what's going on? I pleaded, my voice tinged with panic. The officer holding the warrant folded it up and sighed deeply before responding. It seems he ran away with some cash. The suspect was seen heading towards this house. Someone got a good look at his face, so denying it won't be easy, he said, a faintly triumphant look crossing his face. Theft, my son. While I felt my mind going blank, I forced myself to listen to the officer's words. Despite the color draining from my face, I firmly replied, my child would never do something like that. It's absolutely impossible. The officer, clearly tired, gave a dismissive reply, but I was certain. My son wouldn't do such a thing. After all, I was a 50-year-old housewife, living a peaceful life with my husband and son in the house we had built with years of savings. We all got along well, leading a happy life, right in the middle of bliss. But lately I had been feeling worn out. Things hadn't been going smoothly, and when I was alone, worries constantly plagued my mind. I need to get this done too, I would say aloud, busy without even realizing it. Well, maybe it's okay to leave it for later, I muttered to myself one day as I turned on the TV in the living room, trying to escape reality. It's better to take a break sometimes, I told myself, feeling physically exhausted. But even as I watched the daytime drama, the story didn't sink in, and my thoughts remained cloudy. Suddenly, my gaze drifted to the numerous certificates and trophies on the shelf, awards my son Oliver had received for his achievements in soccer. He was truly a son to be proud of. As these thoughts floated through my mind, the doorbell rang. Who could it be? Yes, I muttered, turning down the TV and getting up from the sofa. Maybe it was something from my mother-in-law. Sometimes she sent vegetables to our house without prior notice, saying she found detailed communication bothersome. Or perhaps it was the online order I had placed recently. My son had been using online shopping more frequently, and my husband had also gotten into it. So that was a possibility. Thinking these mundane thoughts, I went to the door without a second thought. If only I had checked the intercom camera, I might have been prepared for what awaited me. But unfortunately, I opened the door without a shred of suspicion. Yes, I'll open it right away, I said. But the moment the door swung open, I was shocked by the sight before me. Hello, is this the residence of the Smith family? Yes, it is, but you're police officers, aren't you? What can I do for you? I asked, my voice quivering. There stood 3 officers, just like the ones I often saw on the dramas I watched casually. I was completely taken aback. Seeing police officers, even when I hadn't done anything wrong, made me nervous and tense, as if I had unknowingly caused some trouble somewhere. I gripped the doorknob tightly, my knuckles white, as one of the officers handed me a piece of paper. I couldn't make out what the officer was holding at first, so I squinted, trying to see it more clearly. Then in a cold voice, he spoke. There's a warrant out for your son's arrest. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind went completely blank. What? Why? My son is going to be arrested. What does this mean? Has he done something wrong? Questions surged and vanished in my mind as I stood frozen in the doorway, speechless. The officers stepped forward, clearly not intending to let me close the door. Overwhelmed by the presence of the 3 imposing men, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I tried to close the door quickly, but the officers wouldn't allow it. They pressed their feet against the door, keeping it open. Fear gripped me. Your son is here, isn't he? May we come in and talk for a bit? If you're not hiding anything, you wouldn't mind letting us in, right? One of the officers asked, his tone implying suspicion. Please wait a moment, I stammered, desperately trying to stop them from entering. I pushed against their chests, bracing my feet to keep them out. Excuse me, I really don't understand what this is all about. Could you please explain what's going on? I appealed, genuinely confused and frightened. A warrant. For what exactly? The officer holding the warrant folded it with a sigh. Mom, there have been a series of thefts in this area recently. According to witnesses, the suspect looks a lot like your son. What? The suspect looks like him. I repeated, stunned. The officer continued, his voice tinged with triumph. It seems he took off with cash and ran toward this house. People have seen his face clearly, so denying it will be difficult. Theft? My son? No way. As my mind began to spin, I somehow managed to keep listening to the officer in front of me. He then pulled out another document, unfolded it, and started talking about something that seemed related to its contents. It appears your son is involved in several theft cases. The total amount of the damage is around $500,000. However, considering his youth, the victims are willing to settle, he said. $500,000? No way, I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. My child couldn't have done such a thing. It's absolutely impossible. I exclaimed in shock, but the officer, looking weary, replied, I understand how you feel. Every parent says the same thing, thinking their child couldn't possibly be involved in theft. However, we need you to prepare the $500,000, and we'll discuss this further with your son. Staring at the officer's face, I reached for the front door, my mind racing. Could you please wait outside for a moment? I asked. No, we'll wait inside, he responded firmly. I need to use the bathroom. You can't just barge into someone's house without permission while the homeowner is in the bathroom, right? Or can't you wait for just 5 minutes while I go? I blurted out, grasping at any excuse to buy time. I needed to calm down, and the imposing presence of the officers was overwhelming. More than anything, I wanted to close the door. Please let me use the bathroom. I'm at my limit. I'll listen to everything properly afterward, I pleaded. The officer hesitated for a moment, which was all I needed. Quickly, I shut the front door. A loud thud followed. Probably the officer knocking or kicking it. But I didn't hesitate. I immediately locked the door. As soon as the lock clicked, a torrent of emotions washed over me. Relief, fear, and a flood of questions. Mom, please open the door. The officer's voice boomed, accompanied by the sound of pounding on the door. Worried about disturbing the neighbors, I slowly moved away from the entrance. I'll be right back, I called out, rushing to the bathroom. I didn't really need to use it, but I needed a moment to think. Calm down, I muttered to myself, trying desperately to steady my nerves. Gradually, my thoughts began to organize themselves. As I sat on the toilet, my hands trembling as I grabbed some toilet paper, I reassured myself that it was impossible for Oliver to be involved in a crime. It had to be a misunderstanding. Determined, I decided I would face the officers with confidence. After all, I had nothing to hide. About 5 minutes later, after taking a deep breath, I resolved to return to the front door, unlocked it, and faced the officers again. Excuse me, ma'am, the officer called out loudly, but I kept reminding myself to stay calm, no matter what. Your son hasn't tried to escape in the meantime, has he? Please allow us to search the house, the officer insisted. He hasn't done anything like that. I'll say it again. My son hasn't committed any theft. It's impossible, I responded, my voice firm. Even if you say that, we can't just take your word for it. There are witness testimonies and camera footage. If you cover for your son, you could also be implicated, the officer warned. Camera? You didn't mention that before. I snapped, my suspicion growing. We mentioned it because it seems you won't admit it. There is evidence, the officer replied. Earlier, you said he resembled the suspect, but now you're asserting it's my son. Your story keeps changing, doesn't it? I questioned, feeling increasingly uneasy. Look, ma'am, I understand it's hard to accept, the officer continued, relentlessly pressing on and ignoring my questions. His words lacked consistency and something felt off. The information kept shifting, and it didn't add up. Upon closer inspection, even the police uniforms looked like costumes from a drama. I stared intently at the face of the youngest-looking officer, who quickly averted his gaze when he noticed my scrutiny. Clearly suspicious. Enough is enough. We're coming in, the oldest and largest officer declared, pushing past me. Wait, you can't just barge in like that. I protested, trying to block the way, but he shoved me aside effortlessly. I stumbled, falling onto the floor as the officers pushed further into the house. Stop. Don't come in, I shouted, scrambling to my feet to follow them. Don't touch anything. Despite my desperate cries, the officers ignored me, rifling through drawers in the kitchen and living room. Rummaged through everything from one end of the room to the other, leaving a trail of chaos. My stomach churned with anxiety. Stop it, I'm telling you. Hey. I rushed to an officer who was opening a drawer containing mine and my husband's wedding rings and slammed it shut with a loud bang that echoed through the room. There's nothing here. You can't just enter someone's home and go through their drawers. I glared at one of the officers, trembling with anger. It was the younger officer who had averted his gaze earlier. He nodded slightly at me before heading to another room. Eventually, the three officers zeroed in on Oliver's room, clearly identified by the nameplate on the door. Without hesitation, they entered. My son is sleeping in there. Don't go in, I shouted with all my might, but my plea was ignored as the door swung open. We just want to talk, one of the officers called out loudly as they entered, but they suddenly fell silent, all three of them staring toward the bed at the back of the room. Hello. I've heard the conversation. I'm Oliver. My son said, slowly bowing his head toward the officers from his bed. Spreading his arms and smiling, he continued, as you can see, I'm in this condition right now, so there's no way I could commit theft. The officers, momentarily speechless, just stared at him. Oliver was lying in a nursing bed equipped with a pressure sore prevention mattress. Beside the bed stood a wheelchair, and nearby, stacks of towels and a call button were within easy reach. My son was bedridden. I'm sorry, it seems we've made a mistake, said one officer, who had previously spoken in an almost threatening tone, but now wore a rueful smile. Oliver returned the smile slightly. That's right, I'm relieved. I can't move my lower body, so it's impossible for me to steal and run away, he explained, pointing at the wheelchair. I can't even get into that without help. I can't go outside by myself. I see. That was the case. We apologize for our mistake. We'll take our leave now, the officers said awkwardly, nodding their heads as they prepared to leave. Filled with anger, I clenched my fists, wanting to say something. But one officer lingered, approaching Oliver. Hey, he said quietly. What's up? My son replied. What happened to you? Your body? The officer asked, his voice tinged with concern. Steve. Is that you? Oliver looked up at the officer, recognition and joy lighting up his eyes. I approached the youngest officer, suddenly realizing it was Steve, Oliver's childhood friend. Steve? I exclaimed in surprise, covering my mouth with my hand. Steve had been one of Oliver's closest friends since they were kids, sharing a deep passion for soccer. They played together nearly every day from elementary school onward, and had planned to join the middle school soccer club together. But then Steve had to move away suddenly due to his parents' work, and they lost touch. I remember watching you excel at soccer, thinking you'd go pro after college. I even saw you in magazines. But what happened? I asked, unable to hide my shock. Steve, looking visibly shaken, glanced down as Oliver lifted the blanket to reveal his legs, which were motionless. I had an accident a month ago, Oliver said with a sad smile. Now, my lower body doesn't move at all. Seeing the pained expression on Steve's face, Oliver quickly pulled the blanket back over his legs and turned a more genuine smile toward him. But hey, it's really been a long time, hasn't it? You became a police officer, but don't you play soccer anymore? Steve's expression grew complex, and he answered quietly, choosing his words carefully. I didn't have the talent like you, Oliver. Besides, I had other things to worry about. I recalled Steve's difficult family situation. His father, who didn't have a steady job, went out drinking every night. The move wasn't just about his parents' work but also his father's debts. As Steve spoke, his head hung low. Oliver sat up halfway and began to speak encouragingly. What do you mean you had no talent? You were always so hardworking. I was always envious of you, Oliver. You never gave up on anything, and you always looked so cool. I pushed myself because of you. And now, seeing you do your best as a police officer, it gives me strength too, Steve confessed, his voice trembling. I'll do my best, I promise. Next time we meet, let's play soccer together, okay? Even if I'm in this situation, I can still play. There are ways for people with disabilities to play soccer, you know. But Steve didn't respond, keeping his head down, his complexion pale. Hey, are you okay, Steve? Oliver asked. Concern etched on his face. Suddenly, tears began to fall from Steve's eyes, silently dripping onto the floor. Steve, Oliver called out again, his voice filled with worry. Steve struggled to hold back his sobs as he looked up at Oliver. In that tense moment, I noticed the other two officers quietly trying to slip away. Where do you think you're going? I shot them a sharp look, my anger flaring. The officers, caught off guard, exchanged flustered glances. It seems there was a mistake, and we need to conduct further investigations, so we'll be leaving now, one of them stammered, clearly trying to avoid any confrontation. They were attempting to leave without even a word of apology after tearing through our home. Just as I was about to shout at them, Steve spoke up, his voice strong despite the tears. I'm out. The two officers turned to him in confusion. What do you mean, out? One of them demanded. You were the one who said this house was wealthy, Steve continued, his voice shaking but resolute. This is wrong, and you know it. I'll tell everything to the police. A heated argument erupted between the officers and Steve. One of them, driven by anger, lunged at Steve. Wait. I tried to intervene, but fear held me back, and my voice barely registered. The officer's fist connected with a sickening thud, sending Steve staggering to the floor, his cheek swelling from the blow. Another officer kicked him while he was down. Pay the money and clear your father's debt, one of the burly men demanded, his voice dripping with malice. I stood frozen, horror and shock gripping me as I watched their brutality. Despite the pain from the punches and kicks, Steve looked up at the officers and declared, I'll turn myself in. I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm not the person you praised anymore. I've always envied you. Your talent, your life, and I hate myself for using my circumstances as an excuse for the terrible things I've done. Don't joke about turning yourself in, snarled one of the fake officers, raising his fist to strike Steve again. But before he could, a sharp voice cut through the tension. Hold it right there. We'd all turned toward the source of the voice, and a wave of relief washed over me as I saw a real police officer in an official uniform, his badge gleaming. The fake officers were swiftly apprehended by the real police. Sorry for the delay. Are you and your son hurt? The real officer asked, concern in his voice. No, we're okay. Somehow, I replied, still shaken. Earlier, while in the bathroom, I had secretly called the police, reporting that 3 men claiming to be officers were in my house. Their suspicious behavior had prompted me to contact the real authorities. Come quietly, the real officer ordered as the imposters resisted arrest but were quickly subdued. Steve, who had been sitting on the floor, was helped up by one of the officers. He'd offered no resistance as he was led away. Steve, Oliver called out. Steve stopped, turned back to us, and with deep regret in his eyes, he apologized before leaving with the officer. Oliver watched his friend's retreating figure until he was out of sight. After the house was cleared and many questions were answered that day, we began the process of cleaning up the mess the imposters had left behind. I waited anxiously for my husband's return. Despite his demanding job and the long commute, he hurried back as soon as he could, apologizing repeatedly for not being able to contact us sooner. I reassured him that we were safe, and that was all that mattered. Later, we learned more about what had happened with Steve. Steve was the only one of the three to confess to the police. It turned out that they were high school acquaintances who had become involved in a string of thefts in the area. Their scheme targeted wealthy families, falsely accusing their children of theft and extorting money from panicked parents. The fake arrest warrant was their own creation, and the police uniforms were nothing more than costumes. This tactic had worked for them, until this incident led to their arrest. Steve had initially worked hard to pay off his family's debts, but as the interest kept piling up and he couldn't keep up with the payments, he reluctantly agreed to participate in this scheme. He was told that if he provided information about the affluent area where he used to live, a portion of his debt would be reduced. That's why they knew so much about our town and why their crimes had gone undetected for so long. In the end, all of them were arrested and held accountable for their actions. Their attempt to deceive people by impersonating police officers and entering homes without permission resulted in particularly severe penalties. When my son Oliver heard the news, he wasn't disturbed. Instead, he decided to turn himself in, believing in the goodness still within Steve. "I knew it. He's essentially a good guy," Oliver said, nodding and smiling as he listened to me. "It's surprising they weren't caught earlier, especially with those disguises." "Did you know from the start that they weren't real cops, Oliver?" "Yeah," Oliver replied, claiming to be a cop with such an untrained physique. Steve used to be much fitter. I could tell something was off right away. He later shared that he had noticed other suspicious details, like how Steve wouldn't meet his eyes, and how his voice, though different, reminded him of his old friend. "I wonder how long it will be before he can come back," Oliver mused. "It's not confirmed yet, but don't worry. He'll bounce back. He's still the same guy he used to be," Oliver said with certainty. A month later, on a quiet morning, I brought breakfast to Oliver's room. "Good morning, Oliver," I greeted him. "Morning, Mom. Did it arrive today?" Oliver asked, his mind on something else before even thinking about breakfast. I nodded and handed him a simple envelope. "You're more concerned about Steve than breakfast, huh?" I teased gently. "Yes," Oliver admitted, carefully opening the letter from Steve. "What does Steve say?" "He wants to play soccer together. He's been staying active over there," Oliver shared, a smile spreading across his face as he read the letter. Seeing him so happy, I couldn't help but smile too. Beside Oliver was a new type of wheelchair designed specifically for playing soccer. After everything that had happened, Oliver had decided to start training in power chair soccer. His determination was extraordinary. He immediately set his sights on playing soccer with Steve again. Watching him, I made up my mind. Even if there were hardships ahead and things didn't always go smoothly, I would live my life to the fullest, inspired by my always smiling son who faced his challenges with such a positive attitude. Today, I felt like I could accomplish anything I set my mind to.
Even if you attempt to trouble us, there's hardly any loss on your part, considering it's your funds, useless to poor people with lowly lineage. I sighed as I completed the final check. "You're closing your account, right? Please, go ahead," I said with a tone that seemed mocking. Their eyes, filled with clear disdain, made me feel disgusted as they stared at us. I decided it was time to give those who judge others by their upbringing a taste of their own medicine. With that thought, I smiled. "My name is Tiffany, a 29-year-old office worker. Currently, I'm living a peaceful life with my mom while working. My dad passed away from an illness when I was young. His chronic illness had worsened early. My father, who was involved in various businesses, was always busy with work, out early and back late. Even so, he treasured his family time, and I have fond memories of playing with him on his days off. Mom and I were initially shocked by Dad's death, but Mom, not wanting me to feel lonely, cherished our time together. Fortunately, when Dad fell ill, he made sure with the former CEO to secure enough funds for our livelihood. Thanks to that, I was able to go to college, and both Dad's and Mom's parents were very supportive, especially my paternal grandparents, who lived nearby, took great care of me when Mom was away at work. We still go back to both sets of grandparents for holidays like Christmas and spend time together. I am who I am today thanks to the support of many people. To give back, I went to a national university and got a job at a major company. I thought about working at the bank my dad was supposed to inherit, but I chose a career I loved. As you're being told, do what you love. I've already handed the bank over, don't worry about it. Thanks to a fulfilling home environment and the freedom to dive into hobbies, I had no interest in romance. But now, at a mature age, many of my friends are married with kids. This led me to think about marriage, and that's when a certain encounter happened. I never imagined this meeting would lead to a major incident. Hey, Tiffany, aren't you interested in love, huh? That was the starting point, a question from a colleague at work. We've been close since our rookie days. You know, I have an acquaintance who's struggling to find a match. He's well-educated and handsome. You're highly educated too, Tiffany. Maybe you'd like to meet him. I've always thought it's a waste for someone as eloquent as you, Tiffany. There are even a few people in the office who are after you. She has a wide network and always shares various stories. She's living with her boyfriend, whom she met at a party, and seems very happy. She's quite concerned about my lack of romantic involvement. I had even consulted her about marriage, leading to this arrangement. A few days later, I agreed to meet a man named Yves. The rendezvous was at a cafe, and as I waited nervously, a man approached me. Tiffany? Ah, yes, nice to meet you. You're Yves, right? I said, feeling a bit anxious. Yes, thank you for today. Yosef's expression was blank as he looked me over. It felt like he was sizing me up, and I was a bit taken aback. Then, taking a seat opposite me, he quickly started the conversation. What do you do for work, Tiffany? He inquired. I work in sales at a company. I've always enjoyed interacting with people and making use of my opinions, which is why I chose sales. I find it fulfilling, and I love the moments when customers are happy with their purchases. I replied, trying to ease the tension. What's the name of your company? He asked. I told him the name of my company. Upon hearing it, Is paused for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile, more like one of satisfaction. My company is quite a large enterprise with good performance. We're well trusted by our customers, he said, his tone slightly arrogant. Since he asked, I decided to return the question. What do you do, yes? At my question, Is snorted with pride and began to boast. I work at Sunrise Bank as a department head. Sunrise Bank is a really big bank, you know. The work is tough, not something ordinary people can handle. But since my dad is the CEO and I'm the successor, it's different for me. I felt a stir in my chest at Yosef's words. I was expecting a normal response, but Yosef's aggressively toned words made me feel uncomfortable. Indeed, Sunrise Bank is a major bank. I knew about Sunrise Bank due to a certain incident, but I was surprised to learn that Yves worked there as a department head. Wow, that's impressive. Sunrise Bank is a big place, isn't it? I flattered Yves on purpose. I saw no need to be rude, and though I thought this would probably be our last meeting, I figured it was better to be nice. Pleased with my flattery, Yves continued to boast about himself. Honestly, talking to him was painful. He did listen to me occasionally, but always turned the conversation back to himself, even making outrageous comments about his lack of romantic prospects. I'm quite popular, you know, but it's always people who don't match my family background or education level that come to me. I thought the problem might be his attitude, but I had already decided not to meet him again after informing my friend. As time passed, he still looked satisfied and made a suggestion. I'd really like to meet your parents, huh? But we just met today. That's exactly why parents' excellence is important, especially if we're going to date, right? Inside, I screamed. I had no intention of dating him, but he seemed oblivious to my discomfort and kept pushing forward. When are your parents in? Are you available? I'll have to discuss it with my mom. What about your dad? As Yeast pressed on, I felt a growing sense of disgust, but couldn't find the strength to cut him off. My dad passed away when I was young. At my words, Yeast narrowed his eyes. Suddenly, waiting for him to speak, Yeast just said, I see, and fell silent, pondering. Well, send me a date that works for you later. I'll adjust my schedule. No, thank you. Should we leave then? Before I could finish, Yeast stood up. It felt like talking to someone from a different world, despite my reluctance. I had given him my contact information and even discussed meeting our parents. His disdainful look upon hearing about my father's absence bothered me. In the end, we agreed to meet again with our parents. When I explained this to Mom, she smiled. Riley, maybe you were just nervous because you haven't dated before, she said reassuringly. Maybe, but the way he spoke was weird. Well, his parents will be there, right? Just say no if it doesn't feel right. I'll be there too, I replied, feeling guilty. Thanks, Mom. Sorry for dragging you into this, I apologized. Mom laughed heartily. It's okay. No need for you to feel bad. Besides, I'm curious about Sunrise Bank, so let's see how it goes. So, Is and I've arranged a family meeting. At that time, I had no idea Is had planned the meeting for such a shocking purpose. On the day of the meeting, we arrived at the place Is had chosen. It was a fancy restaurant. It's a big place, isn't it? I remarked as we entered. Yes, it is, Mom agreed. Inside, our table was ready, but Is hadn't arrived yet. We entered and waited, and shortly after the scheduled time, Is and his family arrived. Sorry we're late. The traffic was terrible. Nice to meet you. Thank you for today. Yosef's family unapologetically took their seats. Irritated but not wanting to start a fight, I initiated the family meeting. After some time, Yosef's mom, Morgan, with a sly smile, spoke up. So, where is your father? Is he coming later? Huh? She inquired, looking around. I looked at Yes, but he just smirked dismissively and said nothing. I had already told him my dad was deceased. Morgan acted as if she didn't know, despite having agreed to meet our families. Mom quickly responded. In my stead, my husband passed away from illness when Tiffany was young. So today, I'm here as her mother, Mom responded with a calm smile. In contrast, Morgan raised her voice in an exaggerated manner. Oh my, Tiffany is from a single-parent family. Her words took me aback. Even after explaining that my father had passed away from illness, her tone clearly carried malice. Being from a single-parent family, life must be quite hard, huh? But she graduated from a public university. That's commendable, right? Really, but still, being from a single-parent family, wouldn't dating her be complicated? Ye's family's conversation left Mom and me utterly dumbfounded. Despite being present, they spoke so disrespectfully, mocking us as if being from a single-parent family was something bad. Such words weren't suitable for a first meeting. Angered, I retorted in a low voice, Excuse me, but after Dad passed away, Mom raised me with great care. I owe my current life to her. And isn't it rude to speak about someone like that when you've just met, Tiffany? However, Morgan burst out laughing at my words. Rude, isn't it? More absurd for the daughter of a single parent to think about marrying into a high-class family. I'm not really into strong-willed women. This is pointless. There's no getting through to them. Thinking this, I just stared at them in disbelief. I had high hopes since she works at a major company. Well, you'll eventually carry on Sunrise Bank, so maybe she's not quite at your level. As they hurled more insults, I felt no need to listen anymore. Trembling with anger, Mom glared at them. Did you invite us here today just to look down on us? I've heard from Tiffany about the other day. You're enjoying berating us for being a single-parent family, aren't you? Her words took me aback. Even after explaining that my father had passed away from illness, her tone clearly carried malice. Being from a single-parent family, life must be quite hard, huh? But she graduated from a public university. That's commendable, right? Really, but still, being from a single-parent family, wouldn't dating her be complicated? He's family's conversation left Mom and me utterly dumbfounded. Despite being present, they spoke so disrespectfully, mocking us as if being from a single-parent family was something bad. Such words weren't suitable for a first meeting. Angered, I retorted in a low voice, "Excuse me, but after Dad passed away, Mom raised me with great care. I owe my current life to her. And isn't it rude to speak about someone like that when you just met, Tiffany?" However, Morgan burst out laughing at my words. Rude, isn't it? More absurd for the daughter of a single parent to think about marrying into a high-class family. I'm not really into strong-willed women. This is pointless. There's no getting through to them. Thinking this, I just stared at them in disbelief. I had high hopes since she works at a major company. Well, you'll eventually carry on Sunrise Bank. So maybe she's not quite at your level. As they hurled more insults, I felt no need to listen anymore. Trembling with anger, Mom glared at them. Did you invite us here today just to look down on us? I've heard from Tiffany about the other day. You're enjoying berating us for being a single-parent family, aren't you? It was the first time I heard her speak so sternly. Please stop with the accusations. It was just a little teasing, right? No one feels good being mocked, and all your remarks are condescending. We have no intention of listening to this any further. E's family looked displeased at Mom's clear statement. Presumptuous for commoners, huh? Indeed, that may be the case. But this has made up my mind. Ye's family looked briefly surprised at Mom's words, then burst into laughter. They seemed to be thinking, what can you possibly do? Mom sighed and began to speak. Actually, we have funds deposited with your bank, but we don't wish to entrust them to people like you. Oh, really? But we don't know your name, so it can't be much, right? It's probably insignificant. That's right. Even if you try to trouble us with your fun, it won't really affect us. Low-class poor people are not needed. I realized that even Mom's last attempt at reconciliation was in vain. But they continued to speak disdainfully, unaware. I sighed and made the final confirmation. We're closing our account. Okay, go ahead. Yosef's family responded with mocking tones and clearly disdainful expressions as they looked at us. I thought to myself, let's make those who judge others by their background suffer a bit. I smiled at the thought. Is that so? Then we will proceed as such. And please consider this meeting never happened, Yosef's family declared. Of course, I replied calmly, knowing we had no intention of marrying into a family with such prejudices. Well then, we will take our leave now, Mom, and I stood up. Oh, don't worry about today's bill. It's too expensive for you, they remarked. Is that so? Well then, with that, our family meeting ended. Later, I made a phone call. Weeks later, my mobile phone was flooded with calls from Yes. Of course, I had anticipated this and had no intention of answering. It was their own responsibility. I immediately blocked the number. A few days later, I received a call from Grandpa Kyle. Summoned by Kyle, Mom and I headed to Sunrise Bank in the meeting room. Ye's family, looking pale, was present. As soon as they saw us, Morgan stood up and rushed over to bow deeply. I am extremely sorry for what happened, she said. I didn't reply to Morgan's words, just smiled and began to speak. What exactly are you apologizing for? At my words, Morgan bit her lip hard, trembling with anger. That's understandable. There are too many things for which they should apologize. That's probably why she's feeling so frustrated. This whole situation started because I said we would close our account. That day, our account wasn't particularly large. Closing it wouldn't have caused much damage. But Kyle's case was different. Kyle managed the inheritance left by my dad at Sunrise Bank for our benefit. Kyle also had his own account there. If all accounts, including Kyle's and my dad's inheritance, were closed, it would total about $7,000 million. In other words, their disrespect decided the closure. And importantly, Kyle is the former CEO of the bank. Dad was supposed to take over the bank but passed away young, so the position went to Scott. I didn't know that Tiffany was related to the former CEO, Scott. Looking anxious, Yosef pleaded as if making an excuse. But that's no excuse. Even if they didn't know, their prejudice against our family is their own fault. You mean, if we were relatives, you would have treated us differently? Dad interjected. Hey, don't talk to Dad like that. It's your fault for not telling us from the start that your grandpa was the former CEO. I don't have any obligation to tell a stranger like you that. Besides, you were the one who started it and made fun of us, remember? I countered, causing Yosef to narrow his eyes in frustration. You insulted me knowing I was from a single-parent family. When I said I would transfer the bank due to insecurity, you told us to go ahead. We just did as we were told. But it's just that it may be just that for you. But have you ever thought about the feelings of someone whose family has been insulted? Silence fell. Morgan was trembling, looking hopeless, and Scott was hanging his head. But Yosef still seemed unconvinced, his face full of dissatisfaction. Getting all high and mighty just because people talk to you. Yosef remains unrepentant. At that moment, the door to the conference room opened and Kyle appeared. Seeing Kyle, Yosef's tone grew defiant, and Morgan turned even paler. Frozen in place, only Yosef glared at me. Even after giving you a chance to reflect, you're still only thinking about yourselves, Kyle said, his tone stern. It's not my fault. It's her. Watch your words. If you continue, you'll end up even more miserable. Yosef, silenced by Kyle's words, glared at me again. Then, as if resigned, he burst out, "No way. Who would think a single parent's relative was the former CEO? You knew I was the future CEO and came to the family meeting just to mock us." Yosef, be quiet. Kyle glared sternly, causing Yosef to breathe heavily. Future CEO, huh? Kyle then turned his gaze to Scott, who shrunk even more under Kyle's stare. I understand wanting to leave the bank to your son, but now that I know his mindset, it's impossible for him to continue as CEO. That's ridiculous, Scott started to retort, but sat down again under Kyle's gaze. You still don't understand that your attitude is the problem. Though I'm retired, the board will decide. If you have something to say it to them. Remember, we recorded the previous conversation, and this one. Don't forget that the voice recorder will serve as evidence. I took out a voice recorder in front of the three and pressed play. The recorder started playing back our conversation from the other day. How dare you prepare something like that? It's unfair, Yosef exclaimed. It was just a precaution, but remember, you forced me into this situation. I countered. Yosef had nothing to say in return, and their faces turned pale. Thank you, we'll handle it from here, they said. So Mom and I left. Ultimately, Kyle didn't transfer the funds, at least not officially. Scott was removed from his CEO position, and Yosef was demoted. Seemingly unable to handle the blow to his pride, Yosef resigned voluntarily. Kyle's influence in the financial industry meant Yosef would struggle to find work in the same field again. Whether Scott knew this or not, he seemed determined to work until retirement, but Kyle said it would be tough for him both mentally and physically. Morgan, who used to wield power as the CEO's wife, apparently started part-time work to maintain her lifestyle, but her character likely made it hard for her to keep a job. I'm really sorry, I said. It's okay. You didn't know, right? Mom replied. I only shared what happened with a friend who introduced me to Yosef. She just heard about him through someone else and wasn't at fault. Mom was initially concerned about being a single parent, but I'm happy now and can live thanks to the support I've received. When I told her that, she smiled and said thank you. After everything was taken care of, Kyle told us to come over to his house again sometime. I'm really grateful for Kyle's help in resolving the situation. He was tough, but I'm happy now, so it's okay. I have some good news for you, Mom said one day. Really? It's not about dating again, is it? I teased. It's a friend of my boyfriend this time. He's definitely a good guy. I'm not interested in dating right now, but I'm satisfied with my current life. I want to keep cherishing those who support me. And maybe someday I'll meet someone I really click with.